Wide-ranging spending bill over the deployment of immigration agents. They're demanding Donald Trump reins in his immigration crackdown in exchange for their votes. At the weekend, a second person was shot dead by federal agents in Minneapolis. Constitutional attorney, national radio host and Trump ally Jenna Ellis has told LBC she thinks Alex Pretty's death was justified.
I do, based on what we've seen. But I think that the facts are going to continue to come out. But I think that when you are an agitator and you choose, as is your constitutionally protected right, to take a gun to a protest, and then you get up in law enforcement's face, you refuse to back down of the situation. And when you look at the full context of the video, there was a gunshot that went out. There were people saying gun, gun. This is not something where they can go back and review the footage.
The peer steering assisted dying legislation through the House of Lords says it's in real danger of running out of time. Former Justice Secretary Lord Faulkner is accusing its opponents of tabling 1,000 amendments with the aim of running the clock down. Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson has told Tonight with Andrew Marr they have to be sure the bill is safe.
The two doctors settled where 6-month diagnosis sounds really simple. We're told there won't be any coercion. And that's not real. It's just not. So if we're going to do this, we have to do more than this in the current bill. The current bill is just beyond vague.
And Emma Raducanu split with her 8th tennis coach in 5 years. Francisco Rodge will no longer work with the British number one after she exited the Australian Open in the second round. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 17 points at 10,171. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.15. LBC weather, a breezy night with showers pushing northeast across the UK, lows of 1. Rain continuing to move northeast tomorrow. This will be followed by drier spells before another band of rain pushes up from the southwest, a high of 11 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 4 minutes past 7 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Welcome to the programme. You can watch us, don't forget, on the Global Player app, on the LBC app, and of course the LBC YouTube channel. Now, just by the way, I said in my talk-up that Larry Sanders was going to be on Cross Question, and that is absolutely true. David has texted to say, you mean Bernie Sanders, Iain, not Larry. No, I don't. Larry is his brother. So you'll be able to meet Bernie Sanders' brother between 8 and 9. Now, last April, police officers raided hundreds of barber shops and vape shops up and down the country as part of a crackdown on suspected money laundering by the National Crime Agency. Now, the following day, my LBC colleague Nick Ferrari got some reaction to those raids from the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage.
Any market town in the country, you'll find half a dozen barbershops. You know the drill. You go in, no customers, cash only, Lamborghini out the back. And it's been going on for years. And I've been banging on Nick about it forever on social media and talking there to LBC's Henry Riley. And I've just been astonished that the police have done nothing. And we know, of course, they're not Turkish anyway. They're Iraqi or Iranian or Kurdish. In fact, there's probably half a dozen crossing the channel right now that'll be in one of the shops next week. Ram full of illegals, all involved with drugs, mostly drugs. There are other crime elements too, but it's mostly drugs as the use of Class A proliferates across the country. But it's not just barbershops. You've also got Turkish restaurants. Have you seen some of those out there? Oh, they're mega, they are. You go in there, cash only. There's nothing on the menu. I mean, don't worry about that. And then they put their returns in. So this has been going on an industrial scale.
What is the reality? This is all money laundering, would you say, Mr. Farage? What is actually going on here?
Oh, it's money laundering. It's money laundering. Of course it is. Yes, it's a way of funneling large amounts of cash through, declaring some of it to the taxman. That's what the racket is. And of course, the cash, the drugs trade is all cash.
Now, today, a government minister, Miatta Fahnbulleh, the Devolution, Faith and Communities Minister, she has said that attitudes such as that you heard in that conversation there, are tantamount to racism. I don't know what planet she's living on, because it's nothing to do with racism. It is calling out things which are clearly wrong. Now, I don't know about you, but where you live, have you experienced this, where you see all these barber shops suddenly springing up? Very rarely is anybody in them. I mean, I've got one near me. It's well, I better be careful because I better not identify it. But in 15 years, it's a sort of it sprang up as a sort of kebab shop, and there's now a sort of hairdressers next to it. I've never seen in 15 years a single person in either of them. And yet they're still there. Now, any normal business, if it didn't have any customers, would go out of business. And I've always thought there's something odd about this. And how can it be that the numbers of these barbershops in particular have proliferated to such an extent that, I mean, either they are genuine businesses and making a huge amount of money and that's why there is a lot more of them, or there is something going on. Nail bars, we know that they have been used for modern slavery and human trafficking. And yet very little seems to have been done about it. And so I'm going to question why Miata Fahnbulleh, this government minister, is alleging this or saying that Nigel Farage is being racist when he says this, because I genuinely don't think he is. I think he's identified a problem. It's a bit like the grooming gangs issue, isn't it? It's like 15 years ago where the police knew there was a problem, but they didn't tackle it because they were afraid that they would be accused of being racist. Well, she's playing into that with this, isn't she? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Well, I mean, I've got some statistics here of some raids that were carried out in November last year. Police carried out massive raids on high street businesses, including barbershops, mini-marts, vape shops, in the biggest ever crackdown of its kind on money laundering. And it's not just those. All these American sweet shops that keep sort of springing up. Does anyone really buy American sweets from them? Again, there's a load of them in London. I never see anybody in them. All these car washes that have grown up over the years. Now, people do get those car washed, but it's all cash in hand, isn't it? And there is something, I think, going on here that we haven't quite got to the bottom of. Now, a month-long operation in October last year saw 2,734 premises visited and raided, 924 arrests, more than £10.7 million seized, and £2.7 million of illegal goods destroyed. More than 450 companies have been referred to Companies House for further investigations. Now, this was from last October. So I want to know, is this happening in your community? What can you tell me about it? Or if you are operating a perfectly legal Turkish barbershop, nail bar, whatever, and you feel sort of almost insulted that these allegations are being made because you are doing the right thing, give me a call as well. Let's talk to Joseph Cotry Monson, Director of the National Criminal Defence Law firm Mary Monson Solicitors on London's Fleet Street, whose specialisms include defending people accused of financial crimes such as money laundering. Joseph, very good evening to you. There is something going on here, isn't there?
All the listeners, as always, there is something going on, and yeah, very interesting. Of course, I'm a criminal defence lawyer. Doesn't mean I'm going to be defending the principle of money laundering today, but I think it's very important that we make our decisions and have our opinions based on evidence. And I mean, I have to say I was fairly, let's not say disgusted, let's say disappointed by those comments of Nigel Farage when he keeps saying, you know, these type of people, you know, those types of people. That's not evidence. You don't know what's going on there. And that it's right that there has been a massive boom, for example, in barbershops. And that's probably primarily because of two reasons. And they may be empty a lot of the time, but of course, when they're empty, they're empty. And when they're busy, they're very busy, just like kebab shops. And of course, you and I both know, don't we, Ian, that a lot of those places are ones that rely on walk-in trade, and a lot of the ones are
yes, but why have I never seen a single customer in 15 years in the one near me?
Get there. So a lot of them, and in fact, some of the businesses are almost completely on the basis of delivery, doing their own deliveries, not even using the front of the shop. There are actually kebab and these types of restaurants on Deliveroo where they don't even have a location anymore because it's become so superfluous.
Yeah, but hang on, because we all know the local chip shop, that is full of customers. They're walking in all the time, all during the day, all during the evening. But a lot of these establishments are not. They never have any.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you will have your experiences. I have mine. I'll tell you this. If a business is open, HMRC, and I say this as a result of my background in HMRC tax evasion investigations, for example, they have the data. And the reason for that is that they have algorithms that enable them to detect whether a business, just on the basis of what the business is submitting, whether it's consistent and whether it looks fraudulent. Is there tax evasion? Of course there's tax evasion. And why is there tax evasion? Because these are cash businesses. And but
why are they cash businesses? Because a normal hairdresser wouldn't be a cash business.
Any business that takes business on the high street is a cash business. WH Smith is a cash business.
Give me a break.
Of the money that they're taking is based in cash. And if I was wrong, they wouldn't have a till, would they?
No, of course, all businesses take cash. But don't try and pull the wool over my listeners' ears because you're talking absolute rubbish.
Well, in my 200 appearances
hang on. I'm going to put my point to you, whether you like it or not. You can pay £29 to get a credit.
Okay,
we'll finish the interview.
If you give a little bit of respect.
No, you just listen to the question and then have
to make a point.
No, you listen to the question and let me make my point, and then you can answer it, or we'll finish the interview right now.
I'm not pulling the wool over anyone's ears.
Let me finish my question to you.
Of course I will.
Oh, for goodness sake. £29 is what it costs to get a credit card machine. Lots of individuals get them now. So why wouldn't a business of any nature have a credit card machine in their business?
Sorry, it appears we're at cross purposes. When I say cash businesses, I'm not suggesting these people only take cash.
Well, many of them do.
Pardon?
Many of them do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that loads of them are taking a lot of cash. And is there fraud? Is there tax evasion? Of course there is. And it relates to any owner-managed, any non-corporate, and the possibility of that happening with any small business where it's owner-managed, of course, is significant. Do I think, for example, that every single Turkish barber, and this is the danger, isn't it?
Nor do I think that.
Okay, but let me say this, if I may. This is the danger that we say, well, these are all this, these are all that. That's the tone of the narrative here. And I don't like it because it's not based
You might like it because for very obvious reasons.
And I think if you're going around maligning a community and saying they're Turkish, I don't think...
Well, many of them are. It's like the grooming gang scandal back in the day when people said, do you not understand the basics of how interviews work?
Well, you interrupted me to say many of them are before I'd finished. And I understand the basics of interviews that you let the person you're interviewing answer. And I said,
not ranting on, though, like you are.
Well, it takes one to know one here. And I think
Goodbye. Goodbye. Honestly. Let's move on to possibly a more sensible guest. Andrew Wallace is Chief Executive of the anti-modern slavery charity Unseen. Now, Andrew, very good evening. Your charity would not exist unless there were problems in these types of businesses, would it?
Correct. And let's hope we can have a more sort of nuanced conversation. And I think the problem I've got with sort of grandstanding statements on either side of the argument is this is nuanced, this is complex. Yes, there's organised criminality, but there's also modern slavery. We know in the UK at any one time there are about 130,000 victims. The socio-economic cost of that to the UK is about £60 billion a year, so that's 2% of GDP. And where do we find victims? Yes, we find them in barbershops, but we find them in care homes, in hotels, on construction sites, on farms, in distribution centres, in delivery drivers, nail bars, car washes, restaurants, takeaways, on and on and on. And is driven by a demand for both cheap goods, services and labour. But also it is vulnerable people that are being exploited for their labour in order that they can be extracted for the money that they can earn.
I've just had a text from someone saying on his local high street there are 14 different barber shops. Now, this is in Plymouth, so I'm taking his word for the fact that's correct. There are all sorts of these types of businesses springing up everywhere. Now, if there was really such a demand for them, okay, but as we know that they're very often empty. Is it reasonable of people to be suspicious?
Yes, it is. But I think what we've got to do is when we investigate this, we have to say, are these people deliberately working illegally? That's one offence. Are these people coerced and forced to work in that situation? That is the offence of modern slavery, and they're not free to leave that situation. And you're right. We are seeing, currently it's Turkish barbershops that are to the fore. A few years ago, it was nail bars. You've mentioned car washes. None of those have gone away around that. And, for us as Unseen, we run the national helpline for this on 08000 121 700. If people have got concerns, then phone the helpline so that we can take that information and then work with law enforcement in order to investigate what is actually going on there. And you're right, there are circumstances in which we have modern slavery offences, we also have money laundering offences, and we have more linked businesses that are, raising huge amounts of money into the illicit economy.
What should be done about it? Because obviously the law enforcement authorities, they clearly suspect that people are up to no good in many of these businesses. We had all of these raids last October. But what more could they do?
Well, sadly, we're celebrating this year, last year, the 10th anniversary of the Modern Slavery Act. And post that, we had a national task force. It meant then that police forces were tasked with saying that modern slavery is a serious crime and it needs to be investigated. But sadly, in the intervening decade, we've seen that focus drop down. And yet we see the numbers of people being identified increasing about between 15 and 20% year on year. So we do need a renewed effort by policing to focus on these crimes. There are victims that are involved, and we need leadership from the government. And unfortunately today they've announced that what was called the Modern Slavery and Organised Immigration Crime Unit, they're dropping the focus on modern slavery and they're just focusing on organised immigration crime.
Why would they do that?
Because I think you'll have to ask the government, because this is a £60 billion problem that we're dealing with. That there are victims that are in situations that they're not free to leave, that they're coerced, they're often suffering violence, they're often being forced to work against their will, they've been often tricked into that situation because they're in a vulnerable state. And let's not forget, this isn't a problem of other nationalities as well. UK nationals are caught in this. Just last week, just up the road from me in Gloucester, and I'm based in Bristol, a case concluded where a British national had been held in a situation of slavery for 20 years. And so we have to recognise that modern slavery is no respecter of race or creed or nationality. It looks for vulnerable people to prey on in order to make money off their backs.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Andrew Wallace, Chief Executive of the anti-modern slavery charity Unseen. I think another aspect to this is the fact that we know that our high streets have been in decline for many years. I don't think it's necessarily any government is able to take one single measure to reverse that decline. But when you have high streets that are just full of these barber shops, nail bars, all sorts of different, like betting shops, estate agents, they become less attractive for people to visit. And I wonder what you think can be done to reverse that trend. 0345 6060 973. And do you think it really is racist to point these things out? Because I don't. Somebody's just saying, "Oh, when are you going to join Reform?" Well, I'm never going to join Reform. I've made that clear a long time ago. That doesn't mean to say that if Nigel Farage makes a point that I think is salient, that I'm not going to agree with it. And I do think there is a problem here. The law enforcement authorities think there is a problem here, even if rent-a-gob solicitors don't. It's 7:20.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
They have fatal incompetence.
Straight to the point.
What is the problem they've got over there?
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
The country's going backwards. Growth down. Energy prices up.
Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Download it now from your app store. LBC. Iain Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
7:22 on LBC. Now, somebody's mentioning that I should have said charity shops as well. Well, charity shops have always existed on our high streets, and generally they're quite welcoming. They always have people in them. I'd much rather have a high street full of thriving commercial shops, but charity shops are quite important for those particular charities. Stephen's in Hertford. Hi, Stephen.
Hi there. I just was calling in because I completely agree with you that they need to be investigated. They always have, and it's in North London, and it's now spreading out to Hertfordshire as well. It is rife. I grew up in Enfield. Enfield Council, even several years ago, got investigated for approvals of certain businesses over others. This is. I don't think people realise how bad this problem actually is. If you were to drive down Green Lanes in North London as well, the amount of those businesses that you've named, like the small little supermarkets, the kebab shops, the barbers as well, they down that road alone. I used to work in the police force, and I left partly one of the reasons was because nothing gets done ever about certain things like this, and you're wasting your. It's all red. The red tape is crazy. Like as a police officer, one of our jobs to do was to knock on these businesses and to ask them if there's any businesses going on upstairs. What do you think they're going to say to us? Like. The overall mission was to find out whether there was prostitution happening upstairs, above. And then we had to go into the shops, the restaurants, so the barber shops, and ask if anything was happening there or any other businesses that they knew of. They obviously all said no, we don't know. Oh, would you like this for free, by the way, while you're here? No, that genuinely happened all the time. And that was just down Green Lanes alone. I now live in the Hoddesdon area, and during COVID, there were two restaurants on the main. I won't name the restaurants, but there were two restaurants there alone. They were while there were other businesses struggling. They were redecorating. And they were bringing in all brand new furniture. This was in the beginning of COVID, so no one even knew what was going to happen. And that was their time. There was one of those restaurants has rebranded 3 times in the last 4 years.
And why would they do that?
Because it's the easy way of getting around. There's certain tax ways they can get around it. They can change the business owner, the name of it, and what people don't realise as well is not only is it those businesses, it's the suppliers of the businesses as well. It's everything to do with that. It's all interlinked. They all work together. And there was even Sky News did actually report on this. It was very good, actually. I last year about the Haringey Turks versus the Hackney Turks, about the gang war. That's open. Everyone knows about it, but I think only Sky News, that's the only time I've ever heard anyone talk about it properly. And it is rife. It is seriously rife in North London. I don't know what the rest of London is like. Mostly North London, I know, it's really bad. And Hertfordshire as well is definitely spreading out to Hertfordshire. And yeah, there's something definitely needs to be investigated about it.
All right, Stephen, thank you very much indeed. Let's take this text here from XY, who says, it is dog whistle when you choose to focus on one group because of their ethnicity, not talk about others. The dodgy builders, everyone who uses one and pays cash is guilty. They have no right to then complain about a group who is not paying the right taxes. It's not really about paying the right taxes, is it? This is about money laundering and even more serious crimes than that. I'm not sure the analogy works. And I mean, the barbershops do happen to be Turkish. Now, I'm sorry if that offends anyone, if you sort of call it what it is. I think it's really dangerous when people feel that they can't actually say something because it happens to affect predominantly people from one particular country. I do think that's really dangerous for our society, and we've seen exactly what happened with this, as I said, in the grooming gang scandal. Shay is in Hounslow. Hello, Shay.
Hi there.
What would you like to say?
Yeah, so I go to a quote-unquote Turkish barbers quite often. They're actually not Turkish, they're Kurdish, and I think they'd be a bit offended if you refer to them as Turkish, my one specifically. But I can just sort of see the economics on how it works. I go for a haircut maybe twice a month. I pay about £20 each time, so that's £40. If they're getting a couple of people like me in every month, I can sort of see the economics of it. And what you have to remember is these nail bars and these barbershops, it's the only sort of business that I can see that can't be outsourced online. You need to sort of go in and get the work done. And I think it says more about our problems with business rates and on these online companies not paying enough tax. But yeah, I just don't think it's fair to tar them in that brush, because they can have a lot of people come through. If you go on weekends, or especially around times kids are going back to school, there's a lot of people in them. And I think it's quite unfair to just say, maybe because you don't go there, that, it must be a front for money laundering.
No, I'm not saying that every single one is a front for money laundering. But when you have, according to my texter here, 14 different barbershops on one street in Plymouth, you do have to start questioning whether they're all viable. And if they're not, how do they continue to exist?
But I mean, surely in this day and age, and I think if you're a sole trader or whatever, you know how HMRC is when it comes to getting tax from you. I mean, if I do a little bit of extra work, they can pinpoint how much tax I need to pay. So I think it says more about the government and what they're doing if it's not viable. If they're there and operating, quote unquote, legally on the high street, then who are we to say that there's something wrong? And if we do look at it and say, they're cash only and things, maybe to a certain extent, yeah, they're not reporting every single thing that comes through their books. But I think we have a real bigger problem when a company like Amazon can operate from Luxembourg and get away with paying hundreds of millions, billions in taxes while we're chasing one bloke down the street who might be not declaring a couple £100 a month.
I agree with the point about Amazon, but I mean, that's whataboutery. Just because Amazon are allowed to get away with that doesn't mean to say that anyone should, just because they're a sort of small business, if they're doing something that is against the law, they need to be called out for that, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. But I would say, maybe it is just the times you're going, because I'd say to you, go on a Saturday or a Sunday or the weekend just before schools go back. They are absolutely rammed. I hate it because sometimes I'll be thinking, it's only going to take me half an hour in and out, but it ends up being like a two, sometimes even 3 hours waiting for a haircut. And yeah, we need to also have a look and say that if these are the only businesses that can operate, I've seen tons of businesses, new restaurants, new cafes, go onto the high street. And once their sort of promotional business rates are over, they're gone again. And that's a real problem we have, that it's just simply unaffordable to own a sort of brick and mortar store in a lot of businesses.
I would say that any business, no matter what they're doing, that doesn't have a credit card facility is bound to be suspicious. I mean, even like buskers on the streets of London now, they have their little credit card machines because a lot of people don't carry cash anymore. So why wouldn't you have something which, I mean, obviously I don't need to go to a barber's because I don't have any hair, but if I did, I mean, I don't carry cash anymore. I just pay for everything by a debit card or a credit card. And then I pay for it all sort of at the end of the month. So why would you exclude people who no longer really use cash? That would be the question I would ask. But thank you very much indeed. Great call. That was Marshall says, my barbers are Turkish, cash only, but they're genuinely providing a service, i.e. cutting hair. And there is a queue every time I go in there. So, I mean, it is true. This is not black and white. Nobody's saying that all of these businesses are up to no good. But the problem is that quite a few of them are, as evidenced by that raid last October with the number of people that were arrested and charged and the amount of cash that was confiscated. It's 7:32. Let's get the news headlines on LBC with Amelia Cox.
Police are reviewing a report into an orthopaedic surgeon at Great Ormond Street Hospital. It found more than 90 children came to harm at Yasser Jabbar's hands over a 5-year period from 2017. Women who claim they weren't made aware of a change to their pension age say they're considering legal action after being refused compensation. For a second time, the government has rejected a redress scheme, saying it wouldn't be practical. And the former Scottish Liberal Democrat leader, Lord Jim Wallace, has died as a result of complications following surgery. He served as Scotland's first ever Deputy First Minister. LBC weather, a breezy night with showers pushing northeast across the UK, lows of 1.
This is LBC. This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
7:35. If you think I was a bit shouty in that interview earlier on, which quite a few of you do according to my text screen, and you're probably right, tune in at 8 o'clock because we have a panel which is going to concentrate on all issues to do with America, consisting of 4 people who have very trenchant views, and they're going to have some quite feisty debates with each other, I think. Larry Sanders, who is brother of US Senator and former Democratic presidential primary candidate Bernie Sanders, himself a former Green Party of England and Wales local councillor. Jennifer Ewing, spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. Jamie Klingler, campaigner for Democrats Abroad UK. And Tom Rivers, broadcaster and journalist, former correspondent for ABC News in London. So they'll be here after 8. So if you have any questions relating to the situation in America, you may want to ask about ICE, anything to do with Donald Trump, his relations with China, tariffs, etc., be my guest after 8 o'clock. Now, talking of China, Keir Starmer has been in China over the last couple of days. Today, he met President Xi. Let's talk to Dr. John Hemmings, director of the National Security Centre at the Henry Jackson Society think tank. John, very good evening. What did Keir Starmer hope to achieve by this visit, and do you think he did achieve anything?
Well, thanks for bringing me on for this chat. I mean, of course, this cabinet has been all about the economic growth. They've also been, the Prime Minister has been very clear he wants to sort of close off what he calls the quote unquote ice age between the two. The bilateral relationship sort of suffered a number of different backward trends. There hasn't been a prime minister to visit Beijing in 8 years. So, part of it is performative, restoring this bilateral relationship. And then the other part is bringing those domestic goods home.
Did he, though?
I can't see it, to be honest. Just before this call, I looked at the BBC and I see the AstraZeneca investment, and what I see is 15 billion going into China. I see UK being more exposed to a medical supply chain that we already experienced during COVID, with the PRC behaving as it wishes when the cards are up. I do see, some promises about services. This has always been the holy grail, a sort of working group. Those types of things are very thin in details. Some dressing on border security that, for example, Chinese that are infiltrating British borders would be sent back. It just seems very thin on the ground, very performative. Lots of windy speeches, lots of pictures of the Forbidden City and the two men shaking hands. But I don't know if it was really worth it to my mind.
So you don't think anything will come out of it over the long term? You said that it was the first visit by a UK Prime Minister for 8 years, which I suppose is something. But, of course, many British politicians across the political spectrum were against him going in the first place, and he will have known that. Do you think he was right to try and reset relations with China?
Yes, but with the caveat that the UK generally keeps experiencing these sort of mini crises with China, particularly relating to Chinese digital investment or Chinese investment into critical national infrastructure. Almost every time it explodes, like the mega embassy issue, like Huawei, like Hinkley Point, and the demand of China not to have security checks. I believe that other countries are better than the UK at dealing with these sort of continual attempts by China to penetrate the UK in ways that are threatening to national security. But the way we do it, we drag out a yes, then a maybe, then a no, and it becomes a political football in Whitehall. I think we could do better. China's not always the baddie here. I think we mishandle the relationship, and that has to do with how we screen national investment here, which I don't think is very consistent. I think it's too politicized.
John, thank you. That's Dr. John Hemmings from the Henry Jackson Society. Well, let's go back to your calls on, are all of these barber shops, nail shops, US candy shops, car washes, let's bring them into the debate as well. They are suspected, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them are suspected of being money laundering operations, drug running operations. That's what Nigel Farage has suggested. He's been called out on that by Miata Fambulo, the Communities Minister. She says that she thinks that it's tantamount to racism to refer to Turkish barber shops. Well, I mean, to be fair, a lot of them do call themselves Turkish barber shops. But as one of our callers mentioned there, some of them are Kurdish and would not necessarily want that title. A couple of texts here. This is from Stephen, who says, I'm not a fanboy of his, but Nigel Farage is bang on the money. Jack says, I'm a big lefty, Ian, but you can't deny this is suspicious activity. So let's go to Helen, who is in Pinner. Hello, Helen.
Hi, Ian. Hi. I just want to quickly say, your previous caller who was calling from Hoddesdon, who was saying it was all happening around North London, it isn't. My husband's business, he sold it in August in the town of Henley-on-Thames. So he's been looking in South Oxfordshire, Wallingford, Watlington. Every single shop that he goes for is snapped up. There in Pangbourne, there are about 4 Turkish barbers empty of people. And I know what the previous caller was saying about, yes, it's busy at the weekends, but 4, really? Now, wouldn't that high street benefit from having a different type of business? Like you say, who's going to go when it's all Turkish barbers or all nail shops or charity shops and things like that? There's no reason to. And I don't know whether it's the councils that are able to reject these applications or whether it's the landlords. I have a feeling it's the landlords.
Well, the landlord, the landlord will obviously pick anybody that is going to give them money, right, and it's reliable money. They're not going to default on the rent.
Exactly. So how do we stop it? That's the thing. How?
I don't know. I don't know is the honest answer.
How are these people rejected, when they want to go for an empty shop and they want to make it into a Turkish barber? Like you say, the landlord is just thinking about money. He will just take it. That's all he's interested in.
And quite right too, in a way. I mean, I don't know.
Business.
Sorry?
At the end of the day. It's business, isn't it?
Well,
at the end of the day.
It is, but if the landlord thinks that they're taking on a business that is illicit in some way, they're probably not going to take the risk. So they must be convinced. And let's, as I keep saying, not all of them are illicit.
No,
many of them will be.
Listen, I don't believe that they are. Ian, many years ago, my father had a fish and chip shop. Okay, it was, many years ago. I'm talking about he started the business in 1980. There weren't any card machines, like there are now, with the tap and the contactless and things like that. It was all cash. And when my husband started his business in 1999, half of it was checks and half of it was cash. So things have changed now. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't pay in cash, because it isn't fair. If people want to pay in cash, and if that business needs cash, that's fair enough. I don't have a problem with that at all. What's killing the high streets, in my opinion, is excessive business rates and very high rents.
Yeah. No, well, you're absolutely right. And the way to revive the high street is to make rents cheaper. I do not understand any landlord that has an empty shop for more than 6 months and they think that they still want to take the same rent as they had before. Well, they're living in cloud cuckoo land. And I mean, it is possible there for councils to intervene and say, well, OK, if you keep your property empty for more than a certain length of time, we're going to increase the rates on it. So you'll have to pay. That's the way to bring rents down. Helen, thank you. Let's go to Sam, who's in Bodmin. Sam, hello.
Evening, Ian. Yeah, nice to speak to you. I couldn't help but call in just listening. I kind of feel we're in a bit of a pickle when you're being accused of being racist for just highlighting a pretty obviously legitimate issue, to be honest.
Well, I mean, I suppose whenever you do any subject like this, you know that there are going to be people who will accuse you of all sorts of things, but I'm afraid that is not going to stop me talking about issues which I think are actually really important.
Yeah, too right, and don't back down on that. And I think, if I recall, at the top of the sort of item, you were saying that there were 2,000 raids by the National Crime Agency, and that resulted in something like 400 arrests.
Well, there was 930, hang on, I've got the figures here, 2,734 premises, 924 arrests. So effectively, 1 in 3 of those premises will have had someone arrested, or there may be multiple people, I suppose, in one premises. But I mean, that kind of says it all, doesn't it?
Well, exactly. I mean, I got the maths totally wrong there. It's actually worse than I thought. But if you raided that many florists, and a third of them were money laundering, and there were legitimate grounds for arrest, I think, you're quite right to highlight an issue. And to be completely honest, I live in a town in Cornwall. We've got a couple of these businesses, and there's no doubt in my mind that some of these businesses are legitimate, doing good trade and good, honest business. But one of these businesses in town, as you described, generally pretty empty. I think a lot of people around town have often thought, it's a little bit fishy. And then, sure enough, I think probably mid last year in the summer, there was a raid, and it was basically, a sex trafficking business. It was a brothel. So yeah. I'm afraid the statistics that you outlined at the top of the programme speak for themselves, and anyone that thinks that there's not an issue here is just turning a blind eye to a pretty obvious problem.
And the problem is, if you turn a blind eye for too long, it doesn't just remain a problem, it becomes a mega problem. And I think we are almost at that tipping point now where if the law enforcement authorities don't get more of a grip on this, a lot of our town centres are just going to be riddled with these types of businesses, and we don't want them. Sam, thank you very much. Don't forget cross question coming up at 8. You can text on 845-8. 450. Yes, I've remembered the number. 84850. Did I say that wrong? Oh dear. What's going wrong tonight? It's 7:46.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Please, you remember this ban. Now it is to be extended to, it would appear, cafes as well, as was indicated yesterday. So let's turn to Tom Sklanders, who's owner of Wild and Ginger Cafe in Bournemouth. What the Chancellor did, what did it mean to you and your wife's business?
The reality last year for my wife and I is my wife was able to pay herself about £5 an hour. And the business rates implications following the budget were that we are exposed to additional £4,000 in business rates. So whilst my wife was able to pay herself £15,000, say, that's just another £4,000 we need to find before we're able to pay ourselves.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Dale on LBC.
7:49 on LBC. Let's continue with your calls. Neil's in Croydon. Hello, Neil.
Evening, Ian. There's obviously 4 stages to a criminal justice system, which is arrest, charge, court, and then prosecuted or not prosecuted. These people have only been charged, so your statistics don't actually mean anything. Secondly, the reason that people...
Well, many of them won't have appeared in court yet because the courts are clogged up.
Oh, right. Well, until they're charged, there's no evidence or there's no thing to say that these are all things. Now, I'm coming from the point where, yes, there is probably quite a lot of money laundering in these things, but will be within building trades or carpenters or, all sorts of things. It's the fact that Nigel Farage is targeting these places and the fact that Nigel Farage is linked to racism and is a racist.
Oh, very clever. I see what you did there.
And he has a party which is full of racists. There's no doubt about that. It's just today that somebody has come up for their anti-Semitic and racist comments, and now they're being investigated. Okay, that's why MPs call it out, because that's precisely what it is. That's precisely when Nigel Farage is accused of racism from when he was at Dulwich College.
By the way,
that's why
Neil,
people call it out.
Can you tell me the only political party in the UK that bans anyone who's ever been a member of the BNP from being in their party?
Probably Reform.
Exactly. Rather undermines your point, though, doesn't it?
No, not really. He has to try and come out as overtly not racist, even though we know he is.
Well, you seem to know that, yeah.
I do know that, and most of the country knows that as well.
Which is probably why a third of them are voting for him. I mean, are you calling a third of the country racist?
No, just because there are polls, okay, that say he's going to win this and he's going to win that.
Well, they all seem to be quite consistent. It's not just the odd one.
I know, but that's in 3 years' time, Ian.
No, well, fair enough. But, I mean, I doubt whether a third of people in this country who tell pollsters that they'd vote for him would want to be regarded as supporting a racist.
No, but I would say that maybe half the country is because the people that voted for Brexit probably are.
Oh, dear. So you're calling me racist now?
Well, we're not going to go down that road, actually.
Well, you can either say you are or you're not, one or the other.
Well, I'm saying you're probably a closet racist.
And what evidence do you have for that?
Because of things you say.
Like what?
Things that you say. And although you may not be a member of the Reform Party, I'm pretty sure you'll be ticking the Reform box.
I certainly will not.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that, Ian.
Well, yeah, but you see, you just made a spurious allegation there that you can't back up because you can't point to anything that I've ever said that could be considered racist.
I listened to your show, because do you want to know why? Like John Barnes said many years ago, real racists don't get caught. There are people that are clever enough. Nigel Farage isn't a Tommy Robinson.
Well, I'm glad we've established that.
He's too clever to dodge it. That's what he does. That's why he says, "Oh, look at the barber shops. Look at all these places." The one you mentioned, you've been there for 15 years. Unless you're skulking around outside it, Ian, how do you know what business they got? Are you skulking around it 24 hours a day?
Well, of course I'm not, but I've never seen anyone in it. That's the thing. I mean, that's a fact.
So you must be standing outside of it for.
No, I say whenever I've gone past it, I've never seen a single customer in it.
Well, I know shops around where I live, and I go past them all the time, and it doesn't mean that they're not legitimate shops, because I do sometimes go into them, but I'm not outside them all the time to know how much business they've got.
Right. Okay. Whatever. But on that basis, I'm a racist.
No, I didn't say that. I said I think you're a closet one, racist.
Oh, dear. You can't really help some people, can you? Let's go to Paul in Waltham Cross. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Ian. Good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I'm slightly fizzing, if I'm honest, because I think for anyone to come on the radio and throw around accusations like that, they need to see a shrink.
Yeah, I think they've got blinkers on. They can only see what they want to see.
What would you like to tell me?
Well, I'm in the industry. I'm a bus driver myself, and I work with many Turkish Cypriots, Turkish people, and even they believe that a lot of their industries are money laundering businesses, from all kinds, from grocers to bakers to jewellers to barbers. even they believe we sit amongst us, in the afternoon, sitting there talking about A, B, and C, and then they're like, oh yeah, this is, of course, it's obvious, it's a well-known fact.
So why is nothing done about it?
I think our system, as such, has huge, not small, but huge loopholes. And like your previous caller says, they claim bankruptcy, they change the name, and they're off with another name, with another entitlement of another starting up business, doing the same thing, or maybe a different person perhaps owning it. But the sad thing is as well, whether this is all just hearsay or not, or just rumours perhaps, I've even heard that I know for a fact that even people that are within the businesses that have changed hands as well. And these businesses never go to anybody else but their own. If it's a Turkish barber's, for example, if it shuts down because it hasn't succeeded or for whatever reason, then it's another Turkish person that's going to take it over. And it's almost like within their own that they just pass on the jobs. It's like you never get somebody else sort of taking, whether they be, I don't know, Indian perhaps, or English, or whoever they may be, Greeks or whatever, Italians or anything. It just seems to be always passed on through their own kind.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, thank you very much indeed. It's while I'm listening to Paul, I'm looking at my text screen here, and there's now a debate about whether I'm a racist or not. I mean, let me put it this way. If you listen to my programme every night, or say once a week or whatever, and you thought I was racist, why would you even listen to me? Seriously, I mean, anyone that believes that, you've got to look at yourself in the mirror and think, well, I must be some sort of masochist because I hate racists, and yet I listen to Iain Dale. Let's go to Munesh in Southwell. Hello, Munesh. Now, Munesh, you've been calling in, I think, ever since I've been presenting on this radio station. Have I ever said anything that you've listened to where you thought, oh, he's a bit of a closet racist?
Dude, I was going to talk to you about a decent conversation, but when I heard your last caller call you a closet racist, I just cracked up laughing. I don't know where these people are coming from. If you don't agree with someone else's opinion, you're automatically classed as far right or racist. Where's this world coming to, dude?
I know.
It's not happening, is it?
Quite. It's really odd when you call me dude, because that's my dog's name.
No, look, at the end of the day, you got the Turkish barbers. Yeah, they're all Kurdish and Afghans and whatever, Syrians, whatever. It's not racist to call it out. I can tell you something. I run an agency. I rent out commercial buildings on behalf of our commercial landlords. But one thing I do is I check and I verify the economic viability of the business.
Yeah.
So if a barbershop wants to open up, I will first sit them down and say, okay, have you gone through the figures? It's going to be 40 grand rent, 20 grand business rates, bills, this, wages, etc. You need to do 50 haircuts a day in that shop to make it work, just to be net zero, just to break even. Are you going to be able to do that? And if you can justify that to me, then I'll rent in the shop. Otherwise, I'll just say to them, sorry, mate, go somewhere else. I'm not giving you the shop. And this is why the legitimate barbers, they do their sums. And when they do 50 haircuts a day, if you've got 3 stations working, that's 15, 16 haircuts per station. These barbers are going to get tired and they're going to be busy all day long. So when you see empty barber shops, I'm sorry, something is wrong here, and the sums don't add up. And it's very similar to what's happening in Minnesota and in Minneapolis in America with the Somalian daycare centers. I'm sure you're going to get people calling up saying, I'm racist now against Somalians. But no, unless they've just suddenly trebled their IQ and worked out an intelligent quotient level where you can do efficiency, where a $200,000 business can turn into a $2 million business overnight, something is wrong somewhere which needs to be investigated. And it's not racism here.
Well said, Munesh. Thank you very much indeed for your call. Right, coming up on Cross Question, we've got a special US-focused edition tonight, so we want all the questions to be in some way related to the United States. Larry Sanders, brother of US Senator and former Democratic presidential primary contender Bernie Sanders, will be here. He's a former Green Party councillor in England. Jennifer Ewing is a spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. Jamie Klingler is campaigner for Democrats Abroad UK. And Tom Rivers, broadcaster and journalist, former London correspondent for the American network ABC News. Now, they are four people with decisive opinions, and they're here to entertain you. So we're looking forward to this one. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call here on LBC.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Great Ormond Street Hospital's apologised after more than 90 children came to harm at the hands of one of its surgeons. Yasser Jabal treated hundreds of patients between 2017 and 2022. Many were left in pain and in need of further surgery. A report found his approach to clinical care, which involved lower limb reconstruction, was highly inconsistent. Matthew Shaw's the hospital's chief executive.
What I want to say to the families is there is no corporate cardboard apology here. What has happened to these children at this hospital is unacceptable, and it is awful. Yasser Jabal's practice was completely unacceptable.
A teenager will be sentenced in February after pleading guilty to the murder of a 12-year-old boy in Birmingham. Leo Ross was stabbed in a park in Hall Green last January. Democrats in the US Senate have blocked a wide-ranging spending bill over the deployment of immigration agents. They'd threatened to do so, demanding Donald Trump reins in his immigration crackdown. At the weekend, a second person was shot dead by federal agents in Minneapolis. And China is relaxing visa requirements for British tourists. A deal's also been done to reduce tariffs on Scotch whisky imports during Sir Keir Starmer's visit to Beijing. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 17 points at 10,171. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.15. LBC weather, a breezy night with showers pushing north-eastwards across the UK, lows of 1 degree. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Cross Question on a Thursday evening. It's 8 on LBC. Tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to concentrate on all things American. So if you have a question to do with American politics, Donald Trump, foreign policy, defence policy, dare I say ICE, or anything else, I don't mean the rapper, you can give us a call on 0345 6060 973. Let me introduce my guest. To my left, Jamie Klingler is campaigner for Democrats Abroad UK. To her left, Tom Rivers, broadcaster and journalist, former London correspondent for ABC News. To my right, Jennifer Ewing, spokesperson for Republicans Overseas. And to her right, Larry Sanders, who is he's the brother of former US Senator Bernie Sanders.
Present
US Senator, I do apologise. And he's also a former councillor for the Green Party of England and Wales. So you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app, or the LBC YouTube channel, and we're looking forward to your questions on 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app. This is LBC.
Right, let's take our first call. It's from Ben in Clacton. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Ian. Yes, good evening, panel. I've got a question for the American person there.
Well, there's four of them.
Yeah, it's that the ICE and the killings that have happened. It seems to be just Democratic states who are having the problems. When you've got Texas having 2.5 million illegal immigrants and the other states having less, and they seem to be in the front line of the tactics used by ICE.
Jennifer Ewing, let's start with you.
Hi, Ben. So there is a good reason for that, and the reason is because a lot of the Democrat states are not having their state and local authorities cooperate with the ICE agents, cooperate with the federal agents. And when you do that, and a lot of them are called sanctuary cities, you get more violence. And you get, unfortunately, that tragedy, two ICE killings in the last couple of weeks. So that's why you're seeing more of this in Minnesota and compared to Texas.
It does seem a bit of a coincidence, though, that it is Democratic states where this is happening most.
Well, no, not really, because if 2/3 of the violent interactions with ICE have taken place in sanctuary cities. So to define sanctuary city, it means you do not have to cooperate with federal authorities. So most of the cities in America, which is why we're not seeing them splashed all over the news, when the ICE authorities say, hey, can we have access to know who's coming out of your jail, who's obviously a criminal because they've been in jail, and who's the illegal. And that way, we will use less ICE enforcement agents, will do the detainment inside of the prison rather than have it play out in the street. Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, as well as the lieutenant governor and the mayor of Minneapolis, have refused to cooperate. Now, the good news is you had Tom Homan go in there yesterday.
He's the head of ICE.
What? He's the head of ICE.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. He's the head of ICE. And he had a big press conference today. And the good news is Minneapolis has said that they will now finally allow the ICE agents to have access to the jails. So the detainments for the illegal immigrants who are criminals as well, i.e. they've been in jail, will be done there. So hopefully we will not have any more of these tragic killings.
Jamie.
So my eyes are rolling out of the top of my head at the moment. When we talk about also asking for voter rolls, it is an absolute political decision to go into these Democratic cities and have masked men murder U.S. citizens. This is intentional. This is to silence people like Tim Walz, who has refused to give the voter rolls and give that information. This is intentional. They're talking about aiming for Philadelphia next, which is where I'm from, and bring it on. Philadelphia is the last place you want to come on with masked people with guns, because the citizens of Philadelphia will have more to say and more to do, and will stand very, very firmly with Minnesota. The thing is, if you're intentionally doing these politicized killings, then you have to take the repercussions of politicized killing.
That's quite an accusation.
It's absolute.
Deliberate politicized killings.
Well, if you're walking
that indicates that you think that somebody is saying to these agents, right, go out and kill someone today.
Well, they're giving them the impunity to do so when immediately they start villainizing the two people that were killed. Immediately, the lies that go out from the government.
To link the two.
Well, if you are a masked person coming up and you're killing people without due process, police can't kill people without due process. And you've immediately got members of the government saying, oh, well, he deserved it, or, oh, well, he came out to assassinate ICE members. These are the things that they're doing to destabilize protesters, to scare protesters off. And it is happening in the most democratic footholds of the country.
Tom Rivers.
Tom Homan today described his time with ICE, going back to Reagan, for God's sake, going back to Democrats and going in with Republicans. He got a medal from Obama. I forget the exact one, but a civilian award. And basically he said, look, no, this is bad. Problems have arisen. We don't want any killings. He says he's put away at funerals ICE members that he's shown up and had to console families, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd have to discount the fact that this is an organized, if you will, policy of ICE to go out and try to kill people. Compare and contrast Minnesota with Florida. You got DeSantis down there saying, you know what, if we have it, quote unquote, illegal in jail, they've done something, immigration can come in, check them out. If they should be deported, so be it. How many? Over 10,000 people on a plane. Get the heck out of here. Fry hasn't done that. And neither has the governor. Walz hasn't done that. And it really raises the question, why not? It is much smoother. As Holman says, when you go out on the street and have to deal with locations, you don't know if there's knives in the kitchen, you don't know the setting, you have to bring a whole busload of people with you to deal with that kind of situation. He says, look, you can deal with less people, deal with the pyramid of problems. The very top, the people are in jail, sort them out, and then work down.
And make sure to arrest 5-year-old children and take them to Texas.
That's been totally disproven, by the way. That was disproven, actually, and you can mock this, but by the vice president, who immediately looked into...
Who's very trustworthy.
Excuse me, because he has a 5-year-old child. He goes, this is insane. You know, did ICE really use, what was the headline? ICE uses a 5-year-old boy as bait. So J.D. Vance looked into this, and what did he realize is when they had detained the father, he escaped and took off. And ICE was left with the 5-year-old boy. They tried to go to the home and see where he left. The people wouldn't answer the door. So anyway.
All right, let's bring Larry in.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just had to correct that.
Sure.
Well, it's very important to say what's going on. This business about a few criminals coming out of jail is pointless. They are encouraged, not encouraged, they are ordered to arrest 3,000 people every day. This is all over the country. It's more noticeable in the Democratic areas. This is one of the most disastrous, disgusting roundups of innocent people. These are now hundreds of thousands of people. You're going home. You're with your child even. Somebody grabs you, takes you away. Where's your life, your home, your family, your children, your whatever? This is happening to tens of thousands of people. Who are these illegal immigrants that are so dangerous? Do you know? There was a very good statement by a Catholic leader. I can't remember if he's an archbishop or a cardinal. Not a rabble-rouser is what I'm trying to say. The other day, statement. This is the system. The undocumented people are the system. For years, decades, the United States has had people coming in, settling down, working, paying their taxes, bringing up their children. Why are they undocumented? You've got a lazy, frightened class of politicians. It's hard political work to come up with an acceptable policy. So what's the alternative? Leave these poor bastards to stew. You've got 12 million people. They didn't come in on a dark night. They're part of the system. They're 99% ordinary, perfectly normal, decent people who are being harassed and ripped apart. This is one of the most disgraceful episodes.
But Larry, did you say that when Barack Obama was president and he was doing the same thing?
He didn't,
and being quite proud of it too.
He did a lot of horrible things. Yes, if I thought of it, I would have said. I'm sure my brother did.
I'm sure he did.
But anyhow, you have to understand this whole business is made up. Trump, the brilliant politician, a moron and everything else, but a brilliant politician, how is he going to get elected? Demonize all these people. They've come in to invade.
Let's go back to the core issue here, because America has always been a country of immigrants.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know what all of your different backgrounds are, but you're probably not 100% American, if that's even a concept.
Wait a second.
So therefore... And I mean, it's the same in this country. I mean, we have a bit of a similar debate, whereas very few of us are 100% pure English or British or Scottish or Welsh or whatever. So on that basis, I think America's always had a much more liberal attitude to immigration. But why has this changed seemingly in recent years, Tom?
I think Larry hit on it, because, our grandparents, in some cases, great-grandparents, parents, whatever, came over from the old country. In my case, grandparents came from Norway, maternal side from Slovenia. So we worked up in the mines up in northern Minnesota. And you know what? In those days, they all came at Larry through Ellis Island. They did it legally. They hopped through the hoops. And you know how much support they got from the state in those days? Not a single penny. Not a single penny. But nowadays, you can go to the University of Minnesota for free if you're from Somalia. You can have a driver's license. You can get a flat in Cedar Riverside on the west bank of the University of Minnesota. People are fed up. A lot of Minnesotans are fed up. Yes, the ocular of there's another protest makes great TV. Out of the 5.7 million residents of Minnesota, a lot of them are going, you know what? We might be Minnesota nice. We might be tolerant. We might give the give a person a second shot. But if you take advantage of us, enough is enough. And they say, basically, we've had it. And they want this problem solved. They don't want it solved with guns, but they're saying, if you come in legally, we love you, we embrace you. If you just rock up and you just say, I'm here, give me some
Jamie,
goodies,
what part of
that's not going to
do
fly.
you disagree with?
I disagree with this idea that you can just rock up. I don't know about your experiences with immigrating here, but it cost me tens of thousands of pounds.
Well, I guess in a parallel universe, you should have just rocked up.
But this idea that humans are illegal, which I don't believe humans are illegal, and I don't believe that seeking a better, safer place for your children and for your futures is a bad thing.
Do you believe in borders?
I do believe in borders, and I believe in the protection of making sure that asylum seekers have a route to legal asylum. I have a very, very strong feeling that I have 3 adopted sisters from China, and when we first adopted my first sister, she didn't automatically have a green card. Who were you going to send her back to? I think we need to look at humanity, and I think the American dream is kaput right now by doing all of this and by having these men in masks with guns shooting U.S. citizens, let alone everybody else.
Wait a second. It was brought up by Tom Homan. And the fact that it's him who's worked for Democrats and Republicans. He said on the record in a 4-second soundbite, Joe Biden let in at least 10.5 million people just over the border. He says his men were overwhelmed. Trump says it's 21 million.
Yeah.
But and there are zero people coming across the border right now.
Larry,
this is a problem of Biden's making, and your party has to deal with it.
Larry, we'll come to you, and then finally to Joe.
Right, I'll tell you about history. My father came from Poland in 1921. The Ku Klux Klan was active in it, Trump-type organization, as you well know. Anti-immigrant. 1924, the law changed. Things got rougher in Poland for obvious reasons. His brothers and sister wanted to come to America. He and his brother were willing to, help them out. They weren't rich, but they were going to put them up. The law was changed because of those bastards. And Trump and his type are doing the same thing. Hundreds of thousands, millions of people are having their lives disrupted for no good reason. Those people are perfectly good people. They're as good as your family. They're as good as my family. If they hadn't had all this need to win an election, they would have been doing their work. And if the politicians hadn't been so cowardly, they would have had a system. My father had to sign up. He got to wait 7 years and not commit a crime. Mm-hmm. Nothing very overwhelming. He didn't have any money to prove any education. He was left school at 13. So the whole system, everything we're seeing day by day, the horrors multiplied by tens and tens of thousands, and then topped up with the killing and beatings and all the rest of it. And the detention centers. We got more people in detention centers than the Germans did. We're not killing them, thank God. But who knows what comes next?
Sweatsuits at the moment.
Jennifer.
Okay, 3 points. First of all, the reason we can't just have the kind of legal immigration that we had in the past from all these wonderful stories is because our country cannot afford it. Number one. Number two, the idea that ICE agents, the idea that the ICE agents are just gunning down Americans on the street is incorrect. I mean, while it's so sad that Alex Pretty and Rachel Good were killed by ICE agents, they were also impeding and trying to obstruct law enforcement. It doesn't make any excuse, but again, if the excuse, I didn't interrupt you, excuse me, but if there's excuses and there's how did this happen, let's try to prevent it. And how it happened is because the local authorities were not helping out and assisting by doing things like having a parameter. And the third thing is, to be quite crude, Trump won on, this was one of his top 2 issues, was to fix the border, to fix illegal immigration, and to start with the illegal criminals. And if you look at recent polls, including CNN, from both parties, between 55 and 65% of people, all Americans, agree that anyone who is illegal should be deported. If you talk about illegal criminals, that number goes up to almost 80%. So the facts are the facts. And what do you want to overrun democracy? We just had an election a year ago, and one of the top 2 issues was fix this problem. He has to do it.
Well, you've all been very well behaved so far. Shall we see if we can keep it up? I'm not sure we're going to get to 9 before there's not going to be a massive row, but we will see. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Octopus.
Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
20 past 8 on LBC. Let me reintroduce my panel. Jennifer Ewing, spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. Jamie Klingler, campaigner for Democrats Abroad UK. Now, remind me your day job.
I'm the co-founder of Reclaim These Streets.
And Tom Rivers, former London correspondent for ABC News. And Larry Sanders. Larry, how long have you lived in this country?
55 years.
That's quite something, isn't it? No desire to go back at all?
Well, I visited often. Less and less desire to go back, yes. It's not the country I left. I mean, I left because of an English woman in love and all that sort of not very political. But the politics...
That's a good reason.
Anyhow, I got back and visited my little brother.
Marvellous. Right, text question here from Christoph in Reigate. Why does anyone have a problem with already very politically motivated celebrities like Bruce Springsteen having a view on what's going on in Minnesota? I'm a big Bruce fan. He's been giving his views on political matters for decades. Now, Bruce Springsteen released a new song called Streets of Minneapolis yesterday, having only written it over the weekend. It mentions Alex Pretty and Renee Good, the 2 people shot dead in Minneapolis, and makes references to King Trump, but Springsteen has faced calls to stay out of politics and stick to singing, and so on. Right, brief answers from you all, please. Larry, let's start with you.
Well, he's a citizen, he's a human being, he's got a viewpoint. These kind of things always come up and they're really silly. The business with this Trump thing is that Trump is going to be the most hated person in human history. He's working his way up through Mao and Hitler. The people he's killing with his stupid policies and his politics are going to be in the they're already in the hundreds of thousands. They'll be in the tens of millions. Anybody who knows what's going on and doesn't speak up is a fool.
Jennifer.
Oh, that's so disappointing, Larry, because after your first few sentences, I was going to say I agree with you. I agree with you. Bruce Springsteen, great American citizen, might not agree with his politics, but he's got the right to say and sing whatever he wants.
He's the boss.
Well, sure.
Is that him?
Yeah.
Oh, God, I thought I made a fool of myself then.
No, it is. You're correct.
But, I mean, do you not get a bit sick of celebrities sort of intervening in these things?
I don't really. To be honest, I hadn't even heard about that. I think I have a different timeline. I'm too much of a political and Bitcoin and other things junkie, so I don't really listen to celebrities.
Bitcoin junkie. Right. We'll get into that later,
right.
possibly. Jamie.
I think musicians are the soundtracks of revolutions, and I think throughout our world we've done this. This is Woodstock. This is everything. And I think Bruce Springsteen, somebody who's never listened to Bruce Springsteen, is saying, "Don't get political." My favorite thing that I saw in Threads this week was somebody saying to the chicks holding up a sign, "Not ready to make nice," that the chicks should stay out of politics. And it's the most obvious way of saying you've never listened to the chicks. So. Musicians in politics, I can't wait
Is this a popular music beat combo you're referring to?
Yes, I'm not ready to make
I've
nice.
never heard of it.
The Chicks were the organization that was on stage, and they set
the Dixie Chicks.
Well, they used to be called the Dixie Chicks. They're now called the Chicks because they dropped the Dixie because of the racism implications. And they were the ones that had a whole furor over saying that they weren't proud of Bush being their president.
Oh, right.
And then their song after that was "I'm not ready to
I
make
genuinely
nice."
thought you were just saying like chicks.
No. They're very much a political band.
I'm feeling my age.
But then you've got on Sunday you've got Green Day and Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl. So I can't wait for what political demonstration will be happening at the Super Bowl.
Green Day Packers. No, I'm joking. Tom Rivers.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce has, every right to say whatever he wants, just as we around this table have a right as Americans to say whatever the heck we want. Kind of as an observer, though, as a non-entertainment type person, I kind of think that's bad. It's kind of a bad advice, because if you are a Bruce fan and you also happen to be a Trump fan, you're probably not going to buy too much more. If you're a Taylor Swift fan, and you go, Kamala Harris, she can't string 3 words together. I don't like, you're kind of cutting your audience in half. But again, that's their call.
Like the Michael Jordan comment, the famous quote from Michael Jordan when he was advertising for Nike.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to get too political because he said Republicans buy sneakers as well.
Exactly.
And it was the same thing somebody else was doing.
Exactly.
New Coke
If they got
versus
so
old
much
Coke.
money,
well, they're both good.
Fill your boats.
We're
But I think they're cutting their audience in half.
Right. Let's go to a question from Sam in Surrey. Having previously gone quiet about the issue, is Trump only now threatening to attack Iran again to distract people's attention from the actions of ICE agents in Minnesota? We had this on the program last night. Somebody's saying, well, it's not just that, but distract from the Epstein files. I mean, if there was any truth in that, Tom, that would be... that would be outrageous.
I've heard this countless times. You bring out the example, distracting for this or distracting for that or distracting for this. I don't understand this latest wave, this armada that's building around Iran. I really don't understand it. But I don't think it is to distract. We hear Trump speaking every day. Sometimes he speaks for 2 hours at a shot, and I think, no, he's not distracting from anything. But I think, the storylines move on. We were talking the other day about, you used to show up in the newsroom and go, Mo, this is my story of the week. And then it's become, now it's become the story of the hour.
Yeah.
This is the world we live in.
Jamie?
That feels very intentional. It feels intentional to pull focus and to get the focus away from what's going on in Minnesota, because the wave is turning and the tides are turning against Trump. The massive armada about Iran.
Beautiful armada, I think it was, wasn't it?
Oh, no, well, it was both. So his Truth Social was beautiful.
Right.
His speech was massive. And I'd really rather my president not sound like he's comparing penis size when he's talking about a nuclear superpower.
That's the second cross question this week where the word penis has been mentioned. Jennifer.
Sexos, Ian, sexos. So I actually think it's a little more serious than a distraction or a big, beautiful armada. I think what's happening is the president is being pulled in a lot of different directions by different groups who do not have the Iranian people's best interest. And, you're seeing all sorts of propaganda from, even in this country, and certainly in the U.S., and different groups who want, to back Reza Pahlavi or back, somebody from the MEK. And then you've got the people on the ground who say, actually, you know what, we need to find our own leader, because you can't just fly somebody in who hasn't been in the country for the last 47 years. And I happened to go through the Iranian rally outside the U.S. Embassy on Sunday night. And I've been to Iran several times. And, I asked them, I said, they loved me because I was American. They're like, Trump needs to do something. I said, said, what would you like him to do? And they said, just do something. And I said, that's insane. That is insane. And my understanding, oh, well, look what you did in Venezuela. I go, yes, but surely you can't just take out Ayatollah Khomeini. First of all, we're no longer in the regime change business. We did leave the vice president of Venezuela there, number one.
Yeah,
and two,
that's what's called a technicality.
No, I'm joking. That was a joke. But no, because it's just not that simple. So all of these people, they're going, Trump promised to do something, and he's leaving these people out of the court. This is really dangerous rhetoric, and I hope cooler heads prevail.
Larry.
Well, the problem is that Trump is there with power, and nobody knows what he'll do. What you do know is it won't be based on any morality other than what flows through his brain.
But presumably, when a president takes military action, he is given options by his national security advisor and the military. I guess it's his prerogative to choose which one to do, if any. But it surely is a bit of a stretch to think that any American president, whether it's Donald Trump or anybody else, is going to take military action just to distract away from one or two other problems.
But all bets are off. All rules are off. Trump does whatever Trump does, and we all march to the beat. And this is why it was so important for Carney's speech in Davos saying there's a new world order that has to come into play where the whole world is not marching to Trump's beat, because we don't know. He's erratic. We have no idea what he's going to do from the first hour for prepping from this at 4:00 this afternoon to an hour before this.
You prepped for this?
I did. I read the Telegraph and the Daily Mail.
What better preparation could you
Lost a couple of brain cells in the meantime.
Right, we're going to move on to some other issues related to the United States in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
The Metropolitan Police will review a report into a surgeon after it found 94 children suffered harm at his hands at Great Ormond Street Hospital. Yasser Jabbar treated hundreds of patients between 2017 and 2022. A teenager's pleaded guilty to the murder of a 12-year-old at a park in Birmingham. Leo Ross was stabbed to death in Hall Green in January last year. And women who claim they weren't told about changes to their pension age say they're considering legal action after being denied compensation. The government says a redress scheme for so-called waspy women wouldn't be practical. LBC weather, a breezy night with showers pushing northeastwards across the UK, lows of 1 degree.
LBC.
I'm Natasha.
Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:33 on our panel, brother of US Senator and former Democratic candidate Bernie Sanders. He is a former Green Party councillor in, where were you? Was it Oxford?
Oxford.
Yeah, that's quite a good area for the Greens, isn't it?
The whole country is a good area.
Jennifer Ewing is here, spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. Jamie Klingler, campaigner for Democrats Abroad UK. And broadcaster and journalist Tom Rivers, former London correspondent for ABC News. Jason is in Perth. Hello, Jason.
Hi, Ian, and hello, panel. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to converse with Sanders, just for the record. My question is, so, which respectfully, your producer, I kind of worded it wrong, is that so far 2 nations out of the 4 nations of the UK have qualified for the World Cup, with Wales and Northern Ireland on course if they could qualify. So my question is, should the average Brit, regardless of the visas in different countries, should the average Brit be worried about going to America in June?
Now, earlier this week, even former FIFA President Sepp Blatter supported calls for fans to choose to stay away from this summer's World Cup, which is being jointly held in the US, Canada and Mexico. Now, I should explain, the World Cup is a competition that where people play real football as opposed to
yeah, we played as little girls in America. And as a matter of fact, I think our women's team has won the World Cup several times.
You are correct in that, yes.
Thank you very much.
So do you think... you see, I mean, Scottish fans might not have to be in America for so long because they're unlikely to progress to the next round. He said controversially. But should people feel unsafe?
In what way? Because of
what's going on.
Just because of what's going on with, with ICE?
Generally. And I think people in this country, and I tell you,
I'm not
last
trying
night...
to play dumb. If we are talking about ICE, I can easily answer
Well, we are
that question.
talking partly about that, but I think more generally, sort of the gun crime that there is in the US, which we just don't have here.
Okay.
I think there is a general narrative that America is a more dangerous place to go to than it used to be.
Here we go, Ian. I'm glad you asked this question. We have had thank you, Jason in Perth. We have had the lowest number of killings in the United States of America since the 1900s. So factually, that's, you are safer from being killed if that's what you're worried about. If you're worried about being detained by ICE, don't commit a crime, don't overstep your visa, and you should be fine. Regular gun crime, I would imagine that at the World Cup, the security will be through the roof. So I think you should come, have a great time, visit the different cities, and, go to Canada and Mexico as well.
Larry?
Well, the people will be fine. The bureaucrats that Trump has hired by the hundreds of thousands are less fine. I'm just out of chance. I know so many people who have been harassed. It's a very stupid way to do business, but that's the president. But anyhow, I think it's a good place to visit. Go ahead.
There we go.
Yeah. Tom?
Yeah, I think the line from the White House is there's 75 countries that might be under scrutiny, but these are applying for permanent type visas or student visas, or if you have the possibility that it looks like you're going to need a heart operation or something, you may be denied a visa. But if it's a temporary visa, if you're a fan, you should have no problems. If you are a business type, you want to sell umbrellas to America, come on over. You'll be there for 2 or 3 weeks. You should be fine. But if you want to put down roots there, join the queue. It's going to be a long, long line and a lot of hoops to jump through.
Think of the baggage costs on EasyJet if you take umbrellas to sell.
Oh my God, exactly.
Jamie?
As long as you don't have whistles, cameras, or social media, you'll be absolutely fine. Checking people's social medias to make sure they're not dissidents, to make sure that they haven't criticized Trump. I will not go back to America as an American citizen because of the things I've said on Sky and on LBC against Trump. I will not go while this regime is in place because I think they would mess with me at the border, let alone immigrants.
I am thinking of possibly going in June to see at least 1 or 2 games. So you think that, I've been, shall we say, rather critical of Trump from time to time on my social media. Mm-hmm. You think that I could legitimately be
turned away.
Chucked out.
I think as a white man of your age, you probably have less of a chance. But
How
people,
ageist of you.
but I think people from other countries, that people that are less white than you and I are, will definitely have more scrutiny.
How do you know? I'm 11.5% Middle Eastern. So I'm out then.
So I'm not going back, and I think that they should boycott. I think countries and their teams that are going should force the games to be moved to Canada and Mexico.
Don't think that's going to happen. Rico in Kingsbury says, as Americans living here, what did you make of Britain choosing not to join Trump's Board of Peace? Tom?
I think we're buying some time. I think they will come around. I used to cover NATO in the late 80s and also the European community at that time, and used to go to UN meetings in Geneva quite a bit as well. I think they'll eventually come around. NATO position, for instance, here's an example for you, is really U.S. policy. And that was the way it was 90% of the time. The 10% of the time over Lance or IMF treaties, you will bring Europe around eventually. So I think that, yes, the UK will come around eventually. They're kind of putting their feet in the soil right now. But you watch your space. 6 months down the line, they'll be signing up.
Jamie?
I'd love to be on a board of peace with Putin. That just sounds like it's going to be a really good use of anyone's time. Like, this is ridiculous. This is more satire than Saturday Night Live or any satire could come up with. No, they should absolutely not join a farcical board of peace that will have absolutely nothing to do except for kiss Trump's ring.
There's a vision. Jennifer?
Yeah, so I think to answer Rico's question, I think that it's a real missed opportunity by the United Kingdom. And I believe the reason Yvette Cooper stated, which Jamie sort of alluded to, was because Putin's on the board. And I guess my first question would be, not speaking to Putin over the first 3.5 years of the war in Ukraine did not get us anywhere. And how are you going to have
fair,
peace?
Macron tried that and it didn't work.
Well, okay, tried once, but, it's not that easy to get this taken care of. I think, the more you talk to people, the better. What has been going on around the world with regards to peace has not worked. So if this works, great. Why not? And you cannot have peace if you're in an echo chamber of, just the European Union all agreeing with each other. You actually need the principals who do have power. And
but
the other
if you
thing,
look at the people it's not just Putin. I mean, Lukashenko is apparently on it. You've got various other dubious characters. And why would you join something where one of the tenets of it is that Trump is going to be chairman for life?
well, again, you don't have to join, but why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you try it out?
I just told you.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I again, answering Rico's question, I think it's a missed opportunity by the United Kingdom.
Larry?
Well, I think it is a joke. You set up a board, you name yourself the president for life. I think that's very good.
Almost as if you want to be a king.
Oh, my word, I never thought of that.
Sorry, that I can't go to the World Cup. Not
only that, though, you have to pay him $1 billion.
To be a permanent member.
After 3 years.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a Ponzi scheme.
It is.
It's not pay him.
The UK may or may not join. It's just the UK has a lot of problems in dealing with the power of America, but I think it's a sign of some self-respect that Starmer has stayed out.
Okay. Right, let's go to this next one. This is from Ed in Mitcham. How do we go about correcting the bizarre idea some Americans seem to have that London is a lawless Wild West, supposedly overrun by Sharia law? Where does that narrative come from, and how do we actually challenge it? Jennifer, let's start with you. I mean, how long have you lived in London?
Yeah, over 20 years. So I'll tell you something, Ed. It's a great question because, like I said, I've lived here for over 20 years. I go home multiple times a year to the U.S. And with all due respect to the United Kingdom, people usually didn't pay much attention to the news in the United Kingdom unless it was around like the Queen or royals or, something random. But that all changed a couple years ago. And now it is in the U.S., it's in the news all the time, either for free speech stuff or indeed for Sharia law. And there's a lot of, some of it is quite frankly, misinformation. Some of it is true, but the Americans are looking at, for example, the rape gangs and everything, and that was a massive story and continues to be in the U.S., and people don't understand how that's allowed to happen. So I think, to answer his question, that's how it all started.
But the whole thing about sort of London not being a safe place, yes, we have a problem with an epidemic of phone thefts from people's hands in the street. And shoplifting is at record levels. But violent crime is not. And I mean, if you look at gun crime in London compared to any major US city, it is a fraction of what it is. Knife crime, we have a problem with that, though it's coming down. But I mean, Americans seem to have got the impression, largely from Donald Trump, that it is just a place where no American should set foot.
I don't think it's just from Donald Trump. I do think, because I hear it, I know tons of Americans who come visit, and they're like, oh, am I okay to carry a nice handbag? Am I okay to wear my watch? Am I okay to wear my wedding ring? So it is something, and I don't think it's Trump. I think it's probably, not to blame social media, but there's a lot of people out there that have been made more aware of. I remember that when I stepped foot here, 2 weeks after I got here in 2001, I got smashed in the head with a brick and mugged, in the middle of Chelsea. And I was like, what the hell? I just lived in New York for 4 years, never worried about it. And people said to me, oh, that sort of stuff happened. You had it, they didn't. So
that'll teach you to go to Stamford Bridge on a Saturday afternoon. That was a joke, by the way, for all my Chelsea friends. Larry?
Well, as far as I can tell, it's entirely Trump. The whole thing is nonsense.
That's the answer to every one of your questions tonight.
Sorry?
That it's always Trump.
Well, I'm not allowed to use the B word, but Mr. Trump, President Trump, the liar-in-chief, as we call him, it takes up a lot of space in the world, unfortunately, and we're not finished with the damage he's doing.
Well, I reckon, Larry, in the 200 odd days when I've been on air during the Trump presidency, I reckon we have probably done one of the hours on Trump on at least 50% of those days. Probably more than that.
Yeah.
Well,
because you can't ignore him. And if he says something stupid, well, you can't just sort of say, well, we're not going to talk about it because it's plainly stupid.
Because it's good radio and television.
It's a bit more sinister than that. You probably know about Steve Bannon, his one-time right-hand man, said you flood the zone with, can I say
no,
yes word?
No.
Anyhow, you flood...
You're being a very naughty boy tonight.
That's the quote. That's history. Yeah. Anyhow, it's deliberate. He cannot be underestimated for his cunning. His knowledge and his morality are rock bottom.
What about what he says about London?
Well, what he says about London is sheer nonsense. It was part of his attempt to put down the mayor of London, of course. Another one of his charming characteristics is his racism. Is R all right?
You're allowed that one. Jamie?
Well, the racist rhetoric and the fact that for Americans, Britain has always been aspirational. It's always been up on a pedestal. So if you knock that pedestal down and say that it's become Muslim and it's become Sharia law, the only no-go zones in London that I know of are like Madame Tussauds line, which I'll never understand the queue there. Like, it is the safest, most peaceful. And I live in Camden. I live in what would be considered
You're almost in the hood.
Almost. I'm from Philadelphia. I can handle it. But when everything was happening with Reclaim These Streets and I was having a lot of threats online, I was quite nervous about going out here because of everything that was happening with my campaigning against the police. And then I went to Philly, which had 500 gun homicides that year, and came back from Philly and was like, I can walk down the street here and never, ever really be scared that I'm going to get shot at. No masked men are going to be federal agents that are going to come up and shoot me in the face for videotaping them. So in terms of the safety here and there, when people ask me why I'm here and why I've been here for 25 years, a big part of that is guns. And the fact that the lack of guns here has made my life very, very safe. Our healthcare system doesn't have to deal with gunshot wounds in every part of the healthcare system. It's a huge difference.
Well, I think figures out today show we have the lowest murder rate since I think 1990.
Yeah.
30 years, 40 years, 30 years, 35 years. Tom?
Pretty good. Yeah, I think it's a little column A and B. You touched on this, Jennifer. We live in a mediated reality. We can't get away from that. And somebody in Philly, a teenage kid in Philly, is going to go on his phone and he's going to go click, 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 click. Jeez, everybody's getting knifed in London, in Londonistan. And that's the world we live in.
That's intentional. That is paid for.
No, it's not. It's
absolutely
they're not spinning tops. They're off. It's a great content analysis of thousands of people inputting information. So it's not just driven by one person in the White House.
Not platforms?
No, but that image is out there. Do I feel safe walking down every street today? Just like I felt safe 40 years ago? Yes. I've got an engineer pal at one of the networks who has a, God, I don't know where he got this thing, 6,000-pound Rolex. And I go, Jim, you're not going to wear that on the street. And he says, no, I'm getting rid of the thing. Not that I've ever had one, but if I had one, I think I'd think twice about wearing it. One thing that does bother me, though, maybe it's because the older I get, and it was like, a knife incident 40 years ago would be so rare. And now it seems like it pumps up with more regularity once or twice a week, which is kind of chilling. But wrong place, wrong time.
It is, and that's a dilemma that we always have, is sort of the more you talk about it, the more it sort of feeds this narrative that it is sort of maybe a lot more happening a lot more than it really is.
When Sarah Everard was killed, my grandmother said to me, she was like, why is England, why is London so upset about one dead girl? And I was like, because we don't have guns and because we don't fear police the way you do in America. And I think that's a major statement.
Right. Well done, everyone, because we got through 3 questions in that segment. 8:49.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
Lewis and Emily are in Minneapolis, the city where ICE raids have been going on for the past week, leaving the city a tinderbox of tension. A special report from there on the latest episode of The Newsagents.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
8:52. Larry Sanders, Jennifer Ewing, Jamie Klingler and Tom Rivers here with me answering your questions. Here's one from Brian. Does the panel agree with J.D. Vance that the UK doesn't have free speech? I'm not sure he quite said it in those categoric terms, but Larry.
I think he actually did. I think it's quite a serious business. I mean, it's nonsense about the free speech. I haven't run into denial of free speech. What he's upset about is there are some things that you can't say about minority ethnic groups, and I won't repeat them because I keep getting.
Yeah, because I mean, there's two things that you've said on this show tonight where we've censored you.
But I'm quite happy not to be called nasty names. I got called those in New York. I love New Yorkers still, but nonetheless, the names I could do without. So that's the kind of nonsense. But there's a deeper thing, which I don't remember this before, but the American big political stuff, the Republican side, are interested in organizing Europe. They're dealing quite directly with the far-right leaders mostly, the far-right parties, Farage in this country, of course. And they've got a lot of money. They've got a lot of think tanks. They've got a lot of social upsetting things that can get people upset. So they're very cunning. So there's a whole area. The attack on Britain is in that way is similar to the attacks they've made on most countries of Europe, except for the few of their pals in Italy and Austria.
Tom.
Sorry, what was the question?
The question was, does the panel agree with J.D. Vance that the UK doesn't have free speech?
I do find it upsetting when you see statistically how many people are getting called on the carpet over here. Larry, is an American, are you guys? I mean, it's like you're used to just spouting off whatever you said from your 5-year-old kid in the playground. And now all of a sudden...
Well, hang on a second. The United States is far more woke than we are.
No, not now. Not for the past year.
Really?
No.
Obviously, all my Instagram reels are lying.
Exactly. They're a little bit old. But it's worrying if you say something icky that you might get a knock on the door, which is very, very chilling. It's chilling as far as the interaction of things you agree with and things you disagree with.
So TikTok, let's talk about you can't now say Epstein files on TikTok in America. I think America has a much bigger freedom of speech issue than the UK has. And I go on and I say quite a bit and on your shows, on many shows. And actually, I'm more scared for what it would do to my ability to travel into and out of the U.S. without retribution.
I mean, on the other side, I mean, there have been many cases over the last few years where people have said, I mean, maybe slightly offensive things on Twitter, and they have had a knock at the door from the police. Now, these non-hate crime incidents that's apparently now being abolished. But I mean, that is quite chilling, isn't it?
I think it's chilling, but I also think that that's been politically applied depending on who you are and what level of influence you have and who's trying to get you in trouble. I don't think there's just a general ban of if you type in the word Epstein, cops are coming to your door. Whereas right now with TikTok, if you type in release the Epstein files on TikTok, it is not even getting seen.
No, but if you say something derogatory about a trans person, like Graham Linehan did, you get 5 people meeting you at Heathrow Airport. I mean, that was chilling. I mean, okay, that's all now in the past, and the police admit they went over the top. But the fact that could have even happened.
I think that there is, again, the hate speech versus not. And with Linehan especially, when you make a target of a certain group of protected people, it's quite an issue.
Jennifer.
This is a big issue, absolutely, between the United States and the United Kingdom. As a matter of fact, it's going to cost us money. We backed out of the $36 billion or $1 trillion, check me on that, tech deal because we are worried about censorship to our tech companies. So, yes, big deal. Keep an eye on it.
Right. Final question from Robin in Whitehaven. Hello, Robin.
Hello, Ian. Following Prime Minister Keir Starmer's trip to China and the warming of relationships between the UK and China and Mark Carney's speech in Davos, is President Donald Trump weakening the United States' position on the world stage?
You mean reputationally or in terms of power?
Well, I think reputationally, but I think it could backfire on Trump with his tariffs.
All right, thank you, Robin. I mean, we've literally got 30 seconds each on this, I'm afraid, which won't do it justice. Jennifer.
Hi, Robin. I'd encourage you to read the new defense report that the U.S. put out on the 23rd, where it says that, Trump was elected on America first, and we are going to be concentrating inwardly more than outwardly. And I think, yes, that probably will offend some people, but that's what he was elected to do.
Larry?
I think I'm going to have to give it a pass. Otherwise, I would just say that this Trumpism, the fact that the British talk to the Chinese is the least of Mr. Trump's worries. What he's done to the American economy with his moronic tariff nonsense is a lot more to worry about.
Tom?
He's brought in really hundreds of billions of dollars over the past year in tariffs. Other countries have loved tariffs since the end of the war. Now, we're having a little retribution.
What's our GDP?
What?
Pretty sure what's our GDP from a couple weeks ago?
Well, GDP is about 5.4% right now, compared to what, 0.01% here?
Yeah. Tom, it's the American consumers that are paying the price.
Well, they are, but short term. A Ford plant is going around the clock. He said that 2 weeks ago. We have, for the first time, I saw this on the way in, that steel production in America has finally surpassed Japan for the first time since 1999. I come from a boom-bust part of the Iron Range. I know it in my soul, and I understand what the Rust Belt is all about. So does Donald Trump, and those blue-collar workers who used to be in the Democratic Party have gone with the Plan B just to see what the heck Trump can do.
Jamie, I'm pinning my ears back.
I just think that it is a new world order that will come into play with medium powers coming together and having different trade deals that are not dependent on the U.S. And actually, I think a rebalancing and the pendulum flying back the other way is much needed and hopefully will happen sooner rather than later.
And this has just occurred to me, but I mean, the whole Greenland thing, I mean, that on its own, surely, Jennifer, even you would have to agree that has damaged America's reputation massively.
Yeah, but only because anybody that's a serious person and has been paying attention to Trump for the last 10 years knows that he was not going to invade Greenland. That was part of the playbook. It's step 6, where he throws a grenade into a room, says something bombastic, everybody freaks out, they fall in line, and then he gets what he wants.
All right.
Saying it's okay. I'm saying anyone who thought he was going to
we've got to finish with our fun question from Keith in Heather Green. One of your panelists mentioned that rock band Green Day and rapper Bad Bunny will be playing at the Super Bowl next weekend. Green Day will perform before the game begins. But who would be your dream Super Bowl halftime show act to get you to stay up until the middle of the night here to watch? Tom?
Easy one. These guys are from Minneapolis. When I was a kid, I thought they were great. And they were supposed to come here in 1964, and they couldn't because a beat combo kind of took over America. And 50 years later, they came. 12 years ago, I interviewed them. They loved it. Let's get the band back together. Let's get the Trashmen right on the field, halftime show, kicking off with The Bird is the Word, followed by Bird Dance Beat, and then finishing off with King of the Surf. Crank it up big time.
Great call.
Follow that, Jamie Klingler.
My only religion is Dolly Parton. And
Great call.
I would love having Dolly Parton there. And that is the Dolly Parton that invested in vaccines. And that is Dolly Parton who is paying for Renee Nicole Good's entire funeral.
Is she?
She is absolutely.
I've always wanted to go to Dollywood.
Oh, me too. Let's go together.
Jennifer.
And happy birthday, 80th birthday to Dolly Parton.
Yes.
I think she just had it. So my band would be Led Zeppelin, who I did have the pleasure of seeing when they did that one night only reunion at the OT. Too. I knew I liked you, Tom. Yes. Yeah, that's who it would be, Led Zeppelin.
Larry.
Well, I don't follow much music, but I did go to a Bob Dylan concert once. It took me ages to get the ticket. It cost me a fortune, and he didn't turn up. So I'd like to hear him.
You're obviously very forgiving person.
We'll invite him to the halftime.
Well, I remember watching Whitney Houston perform at the Super Bowl. I think it was 86, 87, where she sang the Star Spangled Banner. And I've never heard it sung like she did. It's just amazing. Worth looking up on YouTube. Thank you all very much. Really enjoyed the last hour. I'm sure our audience have too. Now, on Monday's panel, we had the Guardian columnist and former editor of The Times, Sir Simon Jenkins, the journalist Laura Beveridge from Politics Joe, plus MPs Catherine McKinnell from Labour and Lincoln Jopp from the Conservatives. In the next hour, we're going to be talking about this. If you're watching, I'm holding up a book, and it's called The Next World War, The New Age of Global Conflict and the Fight to Stop It. Peter Apps will be joining me in the studio. It's a fascinating book, quite frightening in some ways. But it won't ruin your sleep, I hope. And you can ask him any question you like about the world situation. Could there be really a next world war? Where would it start? How might it develop? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, more than 90 children suffered harm at the hands of a surgeon at Great Ormond Street Hospital. A review of Yasser Jabbar during his time at the hospital has found many were left in pain or needing further operations. Some ended up with legs at different lengths, something he should have worked to correct. Janetta Nana Owusu was among his patients.
The pain was really horrible, like excruciating pain. I just thought, this surgery would be very quick and easy and I'll just go home after. And then it wasn't a really nice experience.
Hospital bosses have apologised and say there are no excuses. A teenager will be sentenced next month after admitting to the murder of a 12-year-old boy at a park in Birmingham. Leo Ross was stabbed to death in Hall Green in January last year. Women who claim they weren't properly informed about changes to their state pension age say they're considering legal action. The government has, for a second time, rejected their calls for compensation, arguing they were given plenty of warning. The Work and Pension Secretary also says it would be hard to identify those who genuinely suffered as a result. Angela Madden is the chair of the Women Against State Pension Inequality group known as WASPI Women. She's told LBC they will continue the fight.
They're a very small group of very powerful people who have decided that the harm and injustice we've suffered doesn't matter. When one of the things that the Parliamentary Ombudsman knew was the department was always going to defend itself. And that's why they laid the report before Parliament to decide, not just the few ministers that happen to believe that they're always right.
Volodymyr Zelensky has thanked Donald Trump for urging Russia's leader not to attack Ukraine this week. The US president says he personally asked Vladimir Putin to avoid doing so during extreme cold weather. And Lord Jim Wallace, who served as Scotland's first ever Deputy First Minister, has died. The former Scottish Liberal Democrat leader was 71. His family say he suffered complications after surgery. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 17 points at 10,171. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.15. LBC weather rather cloudy with some rain in the north tonight. Further wet and breezy weather towards the southwest will move northeastwards across the UK overnight. Lows of 1 degree. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Please, you remember this ban. Now it is to be extended to, it would appear, cafes as well, as was indicated yesterday. So let's turn to Tom Sklanders, who's owner of Wild and Ginger Cafe in Bournemouth. What the Chancellor did, what did it mean to you and your wife's business?
The reality last year for my wife and I is my wife was able to pay herself about £5 an hour. And the business rates implications following the budget were that we are exposed to additional £4,000 in business rates. So whilst my wife was able to pay herself £15,000, say, that's just another £4,000 we need to find before we're able to pay ourselves.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 6 minutes past 9 on LBC. In the next hour, we're going to be talking about this. It's a new book. It's called The Next World War. It's a rather forbidding title, isn't it? The New Age of Global Conflict and the Fight to Stop It. It's by Peter Apps, who joins me in the studio. Now, Peter, welcome. Last time you came in, we were talking about your previous book about NATO. And, I mean, in a way, I want to say this book is quite timely because I think more and more people think that some sort of world conflict is now somehow inevitable. I suppose nothing is inevitable, but clearly you've written it because you think that something could well happen in short order.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was talking to a military audience earlier this week, and I got people to put their hands up if they thought there was more than 50% likelihood of a major conflict. And I would say probably less than 20% put their hands up, but more than a quarter of a chance of a major conflict over the next decade, and well over half did. And I put the risk at about 30%. So I think that's probably roughly where people are. So it's not inevitable. It's not even the most likely, but it's what, if you were an intelligence corps officer writing your assessment, you describe as a realistic possibility. And of course, the question is whether it keeps getting more likely or less likely. And we can talk a bit about the various ways it might start, but it's probably the most dangerous era in human history, more dangerous than the first bit of the Cold War, but it is still manageable, I think, is the overarching message.
Because I suppose in my entire adult life, there have been times, possibly mainly in the 80s, I suppose, when there was a real fear that there could be a big international conflict. But how do you define a world war? Something that is taking place on every continent, or sort of it's just two or three big conflicts happening at the same time?
Yeah, so I mean, there's no precise way of doing it, right? The Napoleonic Wars took place in multiple conflicts, probably could count as a world war if you had that kind of definition at the time. But I think if we're talking about it in the modern era, you're talking about a war that is not just a war in Asia between the US and China, or not just a war between Russia and its enemies in Europe. You're talking about both taking place at once. You're talking about a war, so we've had this phrase from the head of MI6, we're neither in peace nor at war. We've got lots of hybrid stuff going on. But I mean, as I said in another podcast, in a proper war, you're going to be seeing, conventional missile and airstrikes, in Europe and Russia, large numbers of casualties, hundreds a day, maybe even thousands a day. It's going to feel a lot more like the sort of major confrontations of the First or Second World War. And that's why I'm slightly wary of people who say we're already at war, because you risk sort of normalising it. And believe me, you'll know about it if it really happens. But, and this is the difference between those bits you were talking about, the 80s or the Cuban Missile Crisis, back in the First Cold War, there was an assumption we were going nuclear very quickly, within 2 weeks. One of the reasons we don't have the weapons stockpiles is that we didn't build them up during the Cold War. Now there is an assumption that if there is a war, it'll probably be conventional, not unlike the conflict in Ukraine, but on a much wider scale.
And inevitably, any world war is going to involve Europe in some way, which inevitably means that Britain would be involved. It's impossible to predict, I suppose, what kind of war it would be. But warfare has changed so dramatically, hasn't it? Particularly, I would say, over the last decade with the advent of drones. And we've seen that in Ukraine. I mean,
I think that's sort of half true. On the other hand, if I was talking to my great-grandfather's platoon on the Battle of the Somme, we're talking about aeroplanes getting smaller. We're talking about, it is not an unrecognisable environment for people who understand that kind of fighting. So yeah, the technology is changing very fast, as in both world wars, iterating maybe every few weeks or months. But I think we have a fairly good idea where the sort of flashpoints are: Taiwan, Baltic states in Eastern Europe, obviously Ukraine. The war plans that people like the Pentagon and NATO and so forth are coming up with, are fairly, located around particular kind of flashpoints. So we have a fairly good idea what we might be looking at. But I think our ability to manage, particularly that long-term confrontation, is a bit more limited because we're obviously used to conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan that are on an entirely different scale.
Got a text here from Eve who says, "This man is talking us into a war. LBC, shame on you." Well, I would say shame on us if we didn't talk about the possibility that a war could happen.
I mean, the first point is that, as my mother would point out, and the subtitle is "And the Fight to Stop It." So I don't think there is any point in pretending that the world is peaceful, and I don't think, I'm a reporter, so to an extent I may report what's happening in the world. The world is closer to a world war than it's been at any point since the Cold War, and lots of activity is going on to try and mitigate that from lots of different kind of ends. And, I think... Firstly, I think if you look at Europe, what the Poles are doing, what the Baltic states are doing, what the Germans are starting to do, is actually getting us to the point where we are mitigating the risk in Europe, better, not as well as we maybe could. It's not 100% going to stop, but well, certainly some European countries are heading in the right direction. I think the UK is being slower, but that's understandable because we're further away from the danger. I think the US is particularly trying to make sure that it is able to deter a conflict with China in the Pacific, as I said, I think the question is, what is the risk? How do you mitigate it? And what do we need to do to make sure that we get through that era, as we did in the first Cold War? Between 1945 and the fall of the Berlin Wall, we managed to manage this risk. We managed to have 5 decades of economic growth and built the modern world. We need to do that for the next. And the other thing that's important to realise is this confrontation is not going to go away. We talk as if Donald Trump is driving everything. A lot of what's happening in the world will be happening without Donald Trump, and it's going to keep happening after he's left office. Even more importantly, we're going to be dealing with this in the 2020s. If it doesn't go hot in the 2020s, we'll be dealing with the 2030s, the 2040s, and maybe even beyond that. And we need to find ways of handling it.
Do you think, though, in this country in particular, there is a recognition, firstly among politicians, that the situation is incredibly serious and therefore we need to prepare in a way that maybe we haven't done before, but second of all, among the general population? And I think there are parallels to be drawn with the 1930s here, where you had a generation of people growing up wanting to try to prevent a world war ever happening again after the horrible events of the First World War. And I mean, Britain in the early 1930s was effectively a pacifist nation. And I think if you look at younger generations now, I think that attitude is firmly enshrined in younger generations. And that could be a massive problem if there were a conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what it looks like. It depends on a whole variety of factors. I mean, I think actually something really interesting has happened over the last probably 2 months. So I would say that if you go back to last year, general public not really aware of how bad things were going in Europe. War in Ukraine happened, Britain backs Ukraine, a lot of stuff about how we can do that without there being kind of risk and things getting worse. I think over Christmas there's been a realization that partly because Trump has shaken up the world order, partly because the Russians and Chinese are getting more aggressive, that we are in a different state. And I would say actually if you look at the opinion polls, people are now seeing defence on an equivalent level to health and so forth. Not very surprising. People care about health because they think they might break the leg. People care about defence because they realise there might be a war. So I think that we're actually getting quite close to the point where the general public are ahead of the political sort of class. And I think there is also a slowness, frankly, to realise that within places like the MOD that we're moving from a world where you manage conflict with very small numbers of troops and very expensive weapons platforms to a world where, particularly if you're Europe trying to deter a war, you have to do it through demonstrating that you can survive a long war, and that's how you don't end up not fighting one. So you have to demonstrate that you have a plan for a long war. And provided you have that, because Europe is so much more powerful than Russia in terms of population and industry, and that's a point made in the latest US defence strategy. There are two very different lines from Trump. The national security strategy says Europe is weak, we need far-right governments to take over. The one that comes out of the Pentagon says Europe's actually very rich, they can do a lot of this, and providing they do, the US is willing to keep in Europe with some very sort of exquisite high-end capabilities, but the US's priority is deterring China, and they want Europe to be deterring Russia.
It's a very difficult thing, though, for a Western-style democracy, for their government to say to their people, well, look, we believe that there's a real risk of a conflict in the next 10 or 15 years. And that, therefore, means we have got to not just increase our defence expenditure by sort of 5%, we've got to increase it by 30% in the next 3 years. And therefore, we're going to axe this benefit. We're going to axe that education programme. We're going to axe this motorway building. We're going to axe that railway project. Do you really think the British people have got the stomach for that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things first. Firstly, I think there is an awareness, and I think there's also an awareness within government, so you can understand why they're not talking about it. So Britain was the largest defence spender in Europe in the first quarter of the 21st century. We have a defence budget that is 20% larger than Israel. Now, if you think what Israel can achieve with that defence budget, regardless of what you think of the war in Gaza, they've maintained a war in Gaza for 3 years, they've managed to take apart Iran. I think there is an awareness of the British people that if we were simply to increase defence spending now without reducing wastage, we might waste an enormous amount of money without actually building that much capability. So I think you do have to have a bit of a step change in making sure the money you spend is spent on stuff that is actually effective before you open the taps. And I think that is actually popularly understood. And I think actually government getting there, because obviously that's not a conversation government wants to have in public, I think that's probably also happening, but obviously, government are the people who actually have to do this, and that takes a bit of a kind of change.
We are talking about this book, The Next World War. In a moment, we're going to talk about maybe some scenarios of how a world conflict could break out. It's actually quite difficult to predict, I suppose. And we've got some interesting questions coming in on WhatsApp. If you'd like to talk to Peter, I should have explained at the beginning, he is a journalist, defence commentator for Reuters and British Army reservist. And he's obviously got some very, very thought-provoking views. So if you'd like to talk to him, the number to call 0345 6060 973. And can I just assure any of you think that either I or Peter want to talk about this to sort of ramp up the prospect of war, because I have been called a warmonger on this programme before? It's quite the opposite, because I think what we've all got to try and work out is how a world conflict could actually be stopped, because it is quite clear as night follows day that we are in a position, as Peter says, where we are nearer a world conflict than we have been ever since the 1980s. And that is quite a sobering thought, isn't it? It's 17 minutes past 9.
This is LBC. Dale on LBC.
Angus says, Iain Dale pretends to be a war hero. I'd love to know when I've pretended to be a war hero, seeing as I haven't fought in a war, and has contempt for young people who don't want to go to war. Be honest, Iain, would you have volunteered for a major conflict in your 20s and 30s? Your friends will know the truth. Well, Angus, the honest answer is no, I wouldn't have volunteered to take part in a conflict in my 20s and 30s, because I have enough self-knowledge to know that I think I'd be pretty useless on a battlefield. Having said that, of course, in the Second World War, I wouldn't have been given any choice because I would have been conscripted. I don't want anybody to have to go to war. Those who join the armed forces know full well that that might be a consequence of them joining up. But I do think we have to ask the question, have we got a generation of younger people now who are so adamant that they wouldn't fight for their country that they would become conscientious objectors? And what would that mean for societal harmony? I think those are relevant questions. Peter?
Well, and I think it's actually a really important question, because if you look at what happened in Ukraine, Ukraine has a very small population of young people because its birth rate fell off quite dramatically at the end when the Soviet Union collapsed. And they decided they weren't going to conscript young people. You know, they set the lower age, I think it's almost 30 to start with. I think, you talk to any mother of teenagers and she's very keen that her entire husband's generation is sent to war the 30s and 40s before we break open the teenagers. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion we conscript 18-year-olds. I don't even think it's necessarily a good idea. If you look at what the polls are doing, so the poll, you talk about our democracy's up for it. The polls have decided that in the short term they don't need conscription because enough people want military training that they'll give every man or woman who wants it this year military training, and that will probably get them to an armed force that is 100,000 plus strong very quickly. I think if we were in a similar situation, so we're talking about scenarios, imagine if Eastern Europe had been invaded, imagine if we were needing to generate more reserves, the first thing you would do is say, well, okay, who's prepared to volunteer? But I think the more likely scenario is you're trying to deter it, and you say, right, okay, what can we offer people that means that they're willing to do maybe 6 months in Estonia, or 6 months prepared to go to Estonia, not in a war-fighting scenario, but in a scenario where they're sort of where they're helping protect those countries, and what do they get in return? Cheaper mortgages, that kind of thing. I think we need to look at how you incentivize people to spend a long period of time in the reserve. The government's already looking at what you do in cadet forces. I think it's really important that if children sign up for the cadet forces, they don't appear higher on a conscription list. There's a whole bunch of stuff you need to do to make this work, and I think we're just starting to have this conversation. But people like the Poles are knee-deep in that conversation already. The Germans are fairly deep in it, and the truth is that will, the Finns already do this. The truth is that actually there are a bunch of models that we could look at that aren't nearly as terrifying as some of the kind of sort of...
What you seem to be saying is that the countries, the closer they are to Russia, the more they're preparing.
Yeah, because, if you're Poland, the threat is very real, and the Poles are, I think, already close to doing enough to mean that they will not be where the Russia strikes. I think it would be very surprising to see the Russians come through Belarus into Poland. I think they're much more likely to come into either Estonia, which is the most vulnerable of the Baltic states, where there are 1,000 British troops, also about 500 American. Those 500 American are really important. Might they get pulled out in the next 3 or 4 years? Maybe, but they haven't been so far. And in fact, Trump reinforced with US tanks over Christmas. And what's going to happen in Ukraine after a ceasefire. So, you start to sort of... and that really strong bit of German and Polish strength, backed up by the Americans in Central Europe, is a pretty big deterrent to the Russians. Even if they took Estonia, they might be losing Kaliningrad on the Baltic coast. They might lose Crimea. They would certainly see their facilities around Murmansk being hit pretty heavily by missiles and jets from northern Scandinavia, which is a very difficult place for the Russians to overrun. So we can already hold a chunk of the Russians at risk, and that's one of the reasons why actually I think the largest risk we have is if a war breaks out in the Pacific and the Russians join in. That's not a risk we can control. The Americans are trying to deter that. Obviously, if it kicks on from the Pacific, we might have to do stuff in Europe. But again, the Americans are working quite hard to try and make sure that doesn't happen. But that is obviously a much more complicated problem because China is a much bigger threat.
Is Taiwan the most likely spark for a major conflict, do you think?
I would say so. There are various ways in which Ukraine could escalate. There are various things that could happen in Europe. But I think Xi Jinping is very keen to get Taiwan back. The Chinese want it back by 2049. In about 2020, Xi Jinping took a bunch of targets for the Chinese military expansion that had been 2035 and moved them forward to 2027. That really worried the Americans, particularly because they say they have him on the record, so sort of not public discussions, say you need to be ready to attack Taiwan by 2027. I think we now understand that wasn't an instruction to go at that point. Taiwan has an election in 2028. They really want to be able to influence that election so that a pro-China party comes to power. That's very unlikely. And that means I think you'll see that confrontation continuing into 2029, new US president. And then quite possibly, if it doesn't go hot then, and it through into the 2030s.
And what would our role be there? Because, I can't see any way that anybody could actually prevent China from doing this. Let alone, we couldn't, and I doubt whether the Americans could.
You don't have to be able... this is where you go back to the early 1950s, where, if you're going to trigger a catastrophic war, countries don't dare do it. So, the phrase that one of an ex-diplomat is, Xi Jinping doesn't fear much, but he fears the Chinese middle class. The Chinese Communist Party might well lose its grip on power if it lost a very large number of soldiers attempting to take Taiwan. Taiwan is incredibly defensible. It's basically a bunch of hills. You've got to get across a 90-mile Taiwan Strait. It's only really passable in March and September.
Very, very steep cliffs, I think.
Incredibly steep cliffs. There are vulnerable points of the invasion beaches, most of them around the capital of Taipei. The big runways at Taiyuan, the big international airport, are only 5 kilometres from the sea. So there's lots of stuff. But Taipei is a city of 10 million people. No one has ever fought a war in a city like that. Huge underground metro system. The PLA is worried about it. And the other thing, which is really important, is the Japanese do not want Taiwan to fall, because the PLA, People's Liberation Army, Chinese military, says in its pamphlets that once you control Taiwan, you can blockade Japan. Japanese are moving missiles onto their nearby islands. I think the Japanese are betting, particularly under their new prime minister, that if they were to get involved in a fight over Taiwan and the Chinese were to hit them, the Americans would end up being dragged in anyway. And I think they're relying on that to keep Beijing deterred. And that may very well succeed.
Let's take a call from Lee in Frankfurt. Lee, hi. What would you like to say?
Yeah, he Ian. And look, Peter's a super expert on this and far more advanced than me, and he's a fantastic guy. I just wanted to ask him, I just came back from the MK base in Romania, you know, the biggest NATO Eastern Front base.
The large air base.
Yeah, the huge air base. I mean, we have a relative that's an air commander there, and I got a visit onto the base. I mean, it is spectacular, Peter. I'm sure you know that, right? Yeah, both in terms of presence, armaments, air power, everything else that's being expanded there by 35 acres, I think they're doing at the moment. Plus, then you've got the 31st up in Poland. You've got the Slovakian base. I just wanted to ask you a question, genuine question. How long do you think a Russian NATO incursion would last with that level of capability on the Eastern Front?
Well, it depends where it comes. I mean, if you try to take it on directly, not very long. On the other hand, if you punch in, for example, in Estonia, so if you imagine where Estonia is, the furthest Baltic state in, and if simultaneously you are able, so the Russians are in Kaliningrad and the Baltic coast, and they also are very close to Belarus, NATO could probably help hold the Suwałki Gap, but to quote someone I heard a few weeks ago, it will look like Verdun after 48 hours and no one will be able to get supplies through it. So there are places along the front line like Estonia that are a lot more vulnerable because it's harder to get those forces in. The Russians have a lot of air defense around Kaliningrad. They have a lot of strike capability that they can move into Belarus. So, yeah, I mean, the Russians will look at where the most vulnerable point is, and they have a variety, you know, the enemy always gets a vote. There are various things that can be done to push back at that, but it's a reasonable assumption that the Russians will come in the least convenient point. And that is quite possibly the sort of...
Further question, just very quickly. What happens when non-US Navy turns up in the Baltic and the Black Sea?
Well, I mean, I think this is where the world is changing very fast year on year, because the development of undersea drones, we've seen what drones have done in Ukraine and the land, right? The next 5 years, the next 10 years, we'll see undersea drones developing at that kind of pace. So at the moment, the main American plan to stop an invasion of Taiwan is to unleash what they call a hellscape of drones that will stop Chinese landing craft. It doesn't take long after that before the Chinese will have similar drones if they don't do it at the same speed. That allows them to blockade Taiwan. It makes it very difficult for warships to survive, whether they're Russian or NATO, in the Black Sea or indeed the Baltic in a major war. Finland is very dependent on ferries. Estonia would be dependent on resupply by sea. The Swedes are in Latvia with the Canadians. They would take resupplying their force in Latvia incredibly seriously, and I think they would take quite hefty casualties doing that. One of the reasons why countries like Germany and Sweden are signaling they're willing to do this is to make sure that the Russians know that they'll be outlasted by the other European countries, so it will never happen.
Yeah, it's about depth, right?
It's about depth of industry. It's about depth of magazine depth, so weaponry. It's about the ability to strike deep. So things like there'll be more than 1,000 F-35s in Europe by the sort of early 2030s. The Russians are definitely worried about them. Lots of long-range missiles. So you do develop the ability to really hold both. I mean, in Europe, certainly the Russians are a threat. The issue would be in a longer war, of course, if it was also a war in the Pacific, is we might start running out of components very quickly. And that's where it gets a lot more challenging.
Lee, thank you very much for that. I remember Mike Martin, who's fought in the army. He's now a Liberal Democrat MP. He posited he said a war might well start by what you've just said, the Russians invading Estonia. We have troops there, as you've also mentioned. What happens then if Keir Starmer then rings up Donald Trump and says, right, we need to invoke Article 5, and Donald Trump says, why? And Starmer says, well, because Estonia's been invaded. Where's Estonia? And I mean, what would happen if America said at that point, well, we're not taking part?
Well, I mean, firstly, lots of stuff has happened in Europe over the last year, and Donald Trump. The most interesting thing, I think, that has happened in Europe is that as the US pulled its HIMARS batteries out of Estonia in October, because Estonians now had HIMARS, they bought them from the Americans, they put in 14 tanks. And they put in 14 tanks that are far enough forward that they will be part of that fight from the get-go. So you wouldn't need to call Donald Trump to say we need support in Estonia, because Sakya, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Alexis Grenkovich, who is a US general, Chris Donahue, who's commander of US Army Europe, they're going to be in the fight from day one. And actually, when you think about, so Narva is the town on the front line, actually in a crisis, I suspect the Americans would say to the Brits, stay back a few miles, we're going to send our tanks to the border to face down the Russians because we want to be in control of this. That's certainly what happened in the confrontation.
But the military might say that, but Trump as a politician might say, no, we want no part of this.
You say that, but actually every time Donald Trump has been given a bunch of military options for simple sort of decisive action, he often takes it. The first action he took as president in 2017 was to strike Russian contractors in Syria who were threatening US forces, and they wiped them out completely. They spoke to the Russian government. They said, are they yours? Are they yours? Are they yours? The Russian military said, they're not ours. They're not ours. They're not ours. The Americans said, we can hear them talking Russian. The Russian military said, they're not ours. The US military said, we're going to kill them. The Russian military said, they're not ours. And then they killed them. So, I think whether it's Putin or Xi Jinping, Donald Trump always keeps that aggressive, not unlike that approach to Greenland, right? Don't you? Do you feel lucky? You don't know what I'm going to do. I'm a lot more worried about 2029 when we get a new US president, someone like J.D. Vance, who I think is much more likely to say, I'm sorry you let your country be overrun by Muslims. I'm not sure why we should be there. I think we're going to miss Trump when he's gone. I hate to say it, but I think that that many of the things that we dislike about Trump, particularly his sheer sort of bullishness and brutishness, are a deterrent to adversaries. Certainly, Trump was talking to American troops in Germany by phone about 4 or 5 days before the Greenland spat, and he explicitly said, our enemies saw what we did in Venezuela and they're worried. And that has been very aggressively the messaging from the Pentagon. And, certainly the US commanders in Europe, who are very, very close to, people like the Danes, there's a very live conversation going on.
If you were sitting in the Ministry of Defense in Tehran tonight, you might be rather worried.
Yes, although, again, I think if there's no easy option, they won't take it. The reason they didn't go into Greenland is they were worried about having their economy torn apart by the EU, that big bazooka, and also the Danes were being very deliberately enigmatic about whether they would fight. Head of the Danish army, former head of special forces on the ground in Greenland, head of Danish military, so his boss, also head of special forces in Brussels at the NATO Military Committee, literally talking to Sakya. Really quite heavy sort of messaging. The thing that worries me, frankly, about European MODs is that the US military is continuing to be so supportive that they're not necessarily asking the questions as much as they should about what if America wasn't there in 4 or 5 years' time.
I'm going to read this out. I'm not sure if it means anything at all, but Julian says, just a heads up, Ian, an Iranian government Airbus A321 is being tracked on radar and is on final approach into Moscow now. Make of that what you will.
I mean, it might be the Ayatollah fleeing, but it also might not.
Exactly.
I think that is one of the reasons why I sort of wrote the book, in that this, we might get a world war, but even if we don't, the sheer amount of stuff going on is enormous. I mean, someone else sent in a question about Somaliland. Yes, there's lots of stuff going on. Take a step back. What that means is the world is very much in flux. And if we don't get this war, we're still going to get all these confrontations and all these moving parts.
Right, we will continue our conversation with Peter Apps. His book is called The Next World War. It's a fascinating read. It's a very worrying read in many ways, but it's not inevitable. I think that's the point that we should continue to make. So keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973. It's 9:34. Let's get the latest news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
Police are reviewing a report into an orthopaedic surgeon at Great Ormond Street Hospital. It found more than 90 children came to harm at Yasser Jabal's hands over a 5-year period from 2017. Women who claim they weren't made aware of a change to their pension age say they're considering legal action after being refused compensation. For a second time, the government has rejected a redress scheme, saying it wouldn't be practical. And Volodymyr Zelensky's thanked Donald Trump for urging Russia's leader not to attack Ukraine this week. The US president says he personally asked Vladimir Putin to avoid doing so during extreme cold weather. LBC weather, rather cloudy with some rain in the north, further wet and breezy weather towards the southwest, moving northeastwards overnight, a low of 1 degree.
This is LBC. Dale. Text 84850. This is LBC.
9:37. We're with Peter Apps, the author of this book, The Next World War, The New Age of Global Conflict and the Fight to Stop It. Steve says, no one wants a war, but like myself and my mates who were ex-infantry of 22 years, I would love to rejoin and do what we do best in supporting the UK. Don't be fooled by our current numbers of our armed forces at the moment. There are thousands of veterans that would rejoin in an instant. I don't doubt that, but I mean, should we be worried about the lack of numbers in our armed forces?
Yeah, I mean, so firstly, I'm glad Steve's happy to go back because he might not have a choice. I mean, when you leave the regular force, you sign on for depending on how long he's been out for. You sign on to be recalled, and there are systems to do that in the UK. They're not as advanced as they probably should be. If the measure of a country that is prepared for conflict is that somewhere like Sweden or Estonia, people know where they should report to, we know where they get weapons from, we know who's supposed to be in charge, you immediately form them into form units and go on and fight. Taiwan doesn't do that as well as it should. That's one of the problems. Unless they get their act together on that, the Chinese are more likely to invade. The UK, obviously, less imminent threat. But the other thing I would say is that, that experience, when it came to the Battle for Kyiv, some of the people fighting were very highly trained, Western-trained special operations forces. Some of the people were also people who had joined them, signed up literally 12 hours earlier, and the people supplying them, feeding them, bringing them stuff, were ordinary civilians in that fight. The people who blew the bridges and flooded the kind of approaches to Kyiv were civilian and military engineers. So, depending on what the fight looks like, you'd be amazed at who gets pulled in.
Right, let's talk to Guy in Cheltenham. Hello, Guy.
Hi guys. Really interesting conversation. Question for Peter. When Putin started to build up his forces on the Ukrainian border, and I guess Western intelligence knew kind of where this was all leading, from friends of mine in the forces who were kind of at the kind of pinnacle point at that stage, the general feeling was, along with Putin, that it would be a very quick war. Was he surprised how effective Ukraine was at stopping Russia, or did he expect it to be where we are now? That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to know, but I think one of the things, I'm not sure we would have had the invasion of Ukraine without the pandemic, because the truth is that Putin sat basically on his own in a room for about a year because he was very scared of getting COVID, thinking about his sort of place in Russian history. And I think he concluded, partly because looking at how other Western countries handled COVID, the democracies were very weak. And I think he concluded that the Ukrainians would fall over very quickly. I mean, interestingly enough, the Americans were right that the invasion was coming. The Europeans concluded that an invasion wasn't coming. And the reason they concluded that was, firstly, they didn't have access to the Russian intercepts. But they looked at the number of forces and they realized Russia did not have enough forces to overrun the whole of Ukraine. And therefore, they concluded Putin wasn't serious. So, the US and Britain wildly underestimated the resilience of Ukraine as a state. And I think there is a lesson there. And there's certainly a lesson for the Chinese, because the Chinese take very seriously the ability of Taiwan to defend itself. And they take very seriously the idea that they shouldn't get into a fight unless they're prepared to win it. And that, hopefully, will be restraining the Chinese, although they have just fired all their top generals, and we don't really know why.
Oh, all of them? I thought it was just the senior one.
Well, so it is most of the senior commanders. So General Zhang Yaoxia, who was Xi Jinping's friend going back to his teenage years, was fired last weekend, about 10 days ago. But a very large number of commanders, including the Eastern Theatre commander, who was giving very aggressive speeches about Taiwan as recently as May, they've almost all been removed. Not quite clear why. It is clear the Americans were trying to get into dialogue with bits of the Chinese military. That may have backfired rather badly. It may be that these people were saying we're not ready. It may be that they were too ready. So it is so difficult to know what's going on within China that it's very hard to kind of gauge. It is very hard to say whether that makes war more or less likely, because we have very little insight into the top of the PLA.
Guy, thank you very much. Edward says, if we end up in Ukraine as a monitoring force, how risk-averse do you think the UK government will be, i.e. when Coffin's draped in Union flags start coming home, because there will be casualties?
I mean, there are various ways of looking at I don't think it's going to be a monitoring force is the first point. I think it's most likely to be a sort of training force that is either in one place or spread out, designed to support Ukraine. To be entirely blunt, that force is going to be defended by the Ukrainians probably more than it is going to be defending the Ukrainians. This is the sort of joke on Ukrainian social media. It's kind of, well, we understand why we want the British and the French there, but actually we're going to be the guys defending them on the front lines. And that, I think, is going to dial back the risk of British casualties. I think you're not wrong. The Russians may try to inflict casualties. The biggest worry I have about an Anglo-French force in Ukraine is that it might be withdrawn when the French government changes. So, we could easily see a French government fall this year or a French election next year. And I think we would feel a lot less comfortable being in Ukraine if the French pulled out. The other point I think that is quite important is we don't want to remove our ability to support the Baltic states. But actually, what's really important for deterring Ukraine is going to be that Polish, German and American air power in Germany and Poland, because actually they are the people who can punch in really hard if it happens. And the Ukrainians also allow us to deter and attack on the Baltic states, because Estonia is actually quite vulnerable. But of course, we could always help the Ukrainians punch into Kursk, into Russian. If it was a war, there's lots of stuff the Ukrainians could do, particularly with Western support, particularly if the US was on side, and that hopefully should give Putin pause for thought.
Simon says, Ian, please ask Peter what's the best way to deal with Russian apologists like Nick in Ilford. Now, Nick in Ilford is one of my regular callers whenever we talk about anything to do with Russia or Ukraine. He will always call in and very skillfully, without actually appearing to overtly support Putin, will always sort of take the Russian line. And I noticed yesterday we were doing a phone-in on, well, what should Trump do about Iran with this sort of beautiful armada that they've collected together. And the number of messages that I was getting on the text and WhatsApp from people who, on the face of it, seemed quite reasonable. They were basically Iranian regime apologists. And I've noticed this increasing over the years, where people who clearly do not have the United Kingdom's best interests at heart will automatically side with people who are our enemies. What do we do about that?
Well, I think firstly there's a sliding scale, right? So if someone is being paid by the Russians to set light to warehouses in Ilford, then we arrest them, because that is, they've broken a significant number of UK laws. If they're aware that they're being paid by the Russian government to do so quite some of these people are committing crimes. I would say it's a very small minority, but they obviously get punished accordingly. I think it's worth acknowledging that not all the Russian points are stupid. So Medvedev made this point to Jens Stoltenberg about 10 years ago. The Russians have nearly lost their whole country to a European psychopath every century for the last 3 centuries. Charles XII of Sweden, Napoleon, and Hitler. And the 20th century, as he said, 21st century, he said, is only 14 years old. They are now. The counter to that is that if I was the Russians and worried about that, I probably wouldn't be supporting the far right in France, far right in Germany. The Russians are stirring our politics. I think some of it you engage with. Some of it, if it's criminal activity, then it's criminal activity. That's the exception. And by and large, I think people get that. I think the biggest vulnerability Reform have is this suspicion that they are Kremlin apologists, even if many of them are not. I think that is actually going to be one of the largest vulnerabilities they have when they come into an election.
Right, we'll come to more of your questions in a moment. It's 9:46 here on LBC.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish.
Young people are outraged about the eye-watering student debts they're being hit with, but why are they getting so little support from older generations? Plus, why one NHS trust has called in an exorcist.
Ben Kentish at 10. Listen on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
9:49. We are talking about the Next World War by Peter Apps. He's with me in the studio taking your questions and calls. Huge numbers of questions coming in. Let's go to a caller first. Joe is in Elstree. Hello, Joe.
Oh, evening, Ian. Hi, Peter. I just tuned in by accident, but I have to say it's one of the most interesting sort of talks on radio I've heard in a long time. I could listen to you for hours.
Fantastic.
The question that came to mind was the recent Ukraine-Russia war, where it seems like Europe and NATO have exhausted all their arms and have now got no choice but to buy more arms for America if Trump will allow them. The fact that Starmer visited China, it almost seems like because of Starmer's Fabian society sort of socialist tendencies, he wants to be more aligned with communist China than he does with a raging capitalist like Trump. Is that quite? And because Russia and America, seemingly at the moment, because of Russia's war and all the arms they've used up, China and America are the sort of fully armed world superpowers. The fact that Starmer's aligning more with China, is that quite alarming that we have a prime minister that is doing that rather than a Western democratic leader like Trump?
There's quite a lot to unpick there. Weapon stocks, firstly. Yes, Europe is buying American weapon stocks, but by and large, the Americans don't want to ship too many weapons to Europe because they are very worried about being outproduced by China. So what's actually really happening is that German industry is tooling up, and indeed in a major war would tool up even more. I'm not sure I buy that Keir Starmer is sort of more pro-China than pro-Trump. He's put an awful lot of effort into keeping dialogue open with Trump, and therefore I don't think it's that surprising he's doing the same with China. I don't think there's much doubt that if there was a major war, we would be on America's side. We would most likely be on America's side rather than China and Russia, and I think that's clearly understood within various people. I'm not sure I buy your characteristic of the Fabian Society. I mean, the Fabian Society is by and large the right-hand edge of the Labour Party, in my experience. So
Can I tell you something that you will not know? That one of my ancestors was one of the 9 founding members of the Fabian Society.
That I did not know.
No, I didn't know until about 9 months ago.
Interesting.
It explains a lot. I totally agree with you. I think Joe's a bit off the track there. Well, you can't say that just because Starmer goes to China that he's therefore on China's side rather than America's.
Although I think what he has identified is the two big questions, which are weapon stocks, because the Ukraine has shown that you run down stocks very quickly, and secondly, how do you walk the line between China and the United States, which every country is trying to do differently. And those are the kind of two of the really big questions for the next sort of 5 years or so.
Could I ask one more question?
Yeah, go on.
Just regarding Trump's comments last week that caused an international furore regarding his comments about British troops. And I was looking at the statistics of the 20-year Afghan war, where 70% of the NATO troop deaths were American, only 13 were British. So isn't it a statistical... isn't Trump statistically right that because 70% were American deaths, only 13% British, American troops were manning the front lines more than British troops?
Up to a point, but do bear in mind there are 300 million Americans, 70 billion Brits, and actually the highest fatality rate per head of population is the Danes. So, I don't think... yes, America does the heavy lifting.
Per capita?
No, per capita the difference isn't that big. The Afghan war is, I would just say, more complicated than that. Not least because there were certain points where the Brits were quite deliberately going further forward than the Americans would necessarily have gone in places like Helmand and so forth, and kicking off a storm. So I think it's just more complicated than that, I think, is the short answer.
Okay, Joe, thank you very much. Text here from Olad, who says, I think World War III is likely to start with Israel recently recognising Somaliland as an independent country, and there are talks about a military base to secure the Bab al-Mandeb choke point and Red Sea. And with Turkey building bases in Somalia, are we watching a direct Israel-Turkey rivalry solidify rival military blocs around key trade routes? Is this the kind of great power competition over choke points that creates the tripwires for a larger conflict? Well, I have to say, I wasn't aware of any of that.
I hate to say it, I think the truth is, it's even more complicated than that, because what you're also seeing is a really complicated multi-way confrontation over places like Sudan, which involves Russia, involves China, involves it involves Saudi, it involves the UAE. You're not wrong that Turkey and Israel have been sometimes at loggerheads, sometimes possibly on the same side. Still very unclear who was backing who when the Assad government collapsed. Clearly the Turks were involved in that. But it's not totally clear the Israelis didn't have a bit of a hand in there as well. It's incredibly complicated, and it's not just the Bab el-Mandeb. It's down the you've got Djibouti, where the Chinese have got a naval base. You've got the Gulf. You've got Pakistan, which is now offering the US a base near to where the Chinese have a base. I mean, it's not unlike the similar question, right? How does Keir Starmer walk the line between China and Washington? Well, every other country is doing that, and when you get down into the Indian Ocean, you also got to play with all those mid-level powers, of which the UAE, Saudi, India, Russia, China are all incredibly important. France is still down there a bit. Really a huge amount of stuff going on.
This is an interesting question from Susie. My question is, what would the aim of a world war be? Occupation? Annihilation?
So I think it's worth remembering that the world wars don't start because people want to start world wars. World wars start because people think they can win a limited war, and they end up kicking off something they can't control. That's what happened with World War I, that's what happened with World War II, and that's what would happen in a third world war. So the most likely starting point, whether it's somewhere that we've mentioned or somewhere else, is that someone thinks they can win a war easily, and they get proved wrong. And that's one of the reasons why it's really worth deterring it, because if you make the war look difficult, you increase the chances that it will never happen. So I don't think any of the great powers at the moment, unlike maybe Hitler in the 30s, believe they can overrun the world. They just think they can tilt it in their direction, and they think military force might be a good way of doing it, as Russia did in Ukraine, and they get it wrong.
Shailash says, could Peter give a brief view on India versus Pakistan, with China backing Pakistan? I mean, that is a potential flashpoint, isn't it?
Well, and I think it's also a guide to what a limited conflict along any of these front lines could look like. So we had what they call the 4-day war between India and Pakistan, exchange of missiles, aircraft staying within their own airspace but firing missiles against each other. We then saw the Pakistanis almost certainly moving their nuclear weapons around. That got the Americans involved to kind of secure a ceasefire. You then get a big row between Trump and India because India weren't recommended for a Nobel Peace Prize. So, I mean, firstly, lots of interesting relationships. Secondly, the way in which they handled that is, I think, a guide to what some of these confrontations could look like if they escalated a bit but stayed short of proper war. And interestingly enough, the Pakistanis have come out of that war more distrustful of the Chinese, I would argue, and with a new relationship with the Americans, because they recommended Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. And that seems to have got them into a bit of a kind of conversation with the Americans, whereas Modi is now in a row with the White House. So lots of stuff going on there. Again, it just comes down to this idea that all of these relationships are getting more complex, and that's what makes it more complicated than the first Cold War.
OK, let's go to Chris in Manchester. Hello, Chris.
Hi there. Thank you
briefly, if you can, because we're near the end of the show.
No worries. It's a little bit of a strange question. So Chamberlain obviously appeased Hitler because the British economy really wasn't on a war footing. What would we need to do today, and could we do today, to put us in a position to retool the economy to put us onto a war footing?
So, I mean, firstly, I think Chamberlain gets a bad rap, but actually, if you think people of my grandparents' generation, they felt that we were not prepared for war in 1938, and we were by 1939. So Chamberlain came out of Munich after the annexation of Czechoslovakia later in 1938. He decides that war is inevitable, and he really, really, really tools up Britain. I don't think anyone thinks that war is inevitable at the moment, and we're not going to see that kind of mobilization over the next kind of 12 months, because that would not be a reasonable thing to do, because we're not that close to midnight. What I think you are going to see, you've already seen 200 million allocated for things like ammunition, spare parts, and so forth. I think you'll start to see a bunch of measures that will move things. At some stage, I think you'll start to see the beginnings of a civilian contingency plans to how we would deal with sort of Russian cyber attacks, perhaps even limited Russian conventional missile strikes. So I think you'll see that over the next kind of 3-4 years.
Thank you very much, Chris. Russ says, can I suggest that you two do a podcast on this? Would love to hear in even more detail. Well, I probably do too many podcasts. Do you do podcasts, Peter?
I do. So I have a podcast called Facing Coming Storms, which is for the Army think tank, the Centre for Historical Analysis and Conflict Research, whereas we haven't had Iain on so far, and I think we probably should at some point. We've had a bunch of really, really interesting people.
I'm not sure what I would add to the sum of human knowledge.
And there are some really interesting interviews there. It was weekly last year. It is monthly this year, not least because the government has other things to spend its military budget on. But there's a whole back catalogue of really interesting interviews there.
And the Sky News podcast, The War Game, is well worth listening to. Thank you very much, Peter. Do buy his book, The Next World War. It's out now. Now, thank you for all of your calls and messages this evening throughout this week. I will be back on Monday evening from 7. Coming up at 1 on LBC, it's Clive Bull. But right now, Ben Kentish.
Iain, thank you very much indeed. Hello there. A very good evening indeed to you this Thursday night. Ben Kentish here with you on LBC. On the show,
student loans are a national scandal, a national disgrace. They are inequitable, they are regressive.
Hard to argue with that, isn't it? Hence why there's so much outrage today about Rachel Reeves freezing the threshold at which people have to start paying back their loans, meaning more and more low-paid young graduates are going to have to pay more in interest payments to the Chancellor. She insists it's fair, but